Okay, great. Now we have that out of the way, we can begin. Once again, my name is Mike from Workday. Together, we are with Collaborative Solutions, and this is the Vibe Central Enablement Workshop. What we're going to do is introduce you to the team. Like I said before, my name is Mike. I'm a member of the Vibe Accelerator team, which is an initiative that we put together to improve our diversity and inclusion outlook, and also promote that through our customers and our partners, which is what we're doing right now. So it's an awesome project. Happy to do that, and we have a tremendous response from our customers and partners. Really appreciate Collaborative Solutions for volunteering to do this. They volunteered to host 2 sessions, which are free of charge for our customers, and I'm excited about that. So go ahead and introduce the Collaborative Solutions team, starting with Harvey.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. So my name is Harvey Cassidy, and I'm one of the practice leaders up here at Collaborative Solutions. I've been in the ecosystem for about 10 years, and the reason I say that is I've seen a number of evolutions within Workday, and I think that Vibe is really a great step in that natural evolution, and I'm excited to talk to you further with it. Now, I've been told I have a voice for radio. I have 4 kids doing remote learning at home, so I hope y'all don't mind the lack of webcams that are going to be going on today. Appreciate it. So Kyla, I'll pass it off to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Harvey. Hi, everyone. My name is Kyla Hermelin. I'm a subject matter expert within Workday Reporting and Analytics and within Diversity and Inclusion. I am excited to be here with all of you, and I hope you all enjoy learning about Workday's Vibes capabilities.
All right, thank you so much. So that's Team Collaborative Solutions. They're leading the way. What I'm going to do first, though, I'm going to give you the Vibe overview, and then we'll move right into Harvey's presentation. Now, just so you all know, I do get questions once in a while about the length of the workshop. So the length of the workshop, this is scheduled for 4 hours. However, we've found that sometimes it moves a little faster. But our goal is to make sure we answer all of your questions during the workshop. If there is a question that is difficult to answer and we cannot answer it together, we'll take your contact information, and I will find an answer to that question, or we will find an answer to that question. All right, so it's just kind of knock out some of the logistics. As you know, we'd like to keep the phones muted, but we do want interaction. So at times I might just ask you if you would want to ask that question directly. So see if you want to volunteer to come off of mute and just clarify the question. But our primary go-to for all questions is the chat function. And I have that up. I'll be monitoring that. I'll also be posting the link to our survey towards the end of the presentation in that chat box as well. So chat is primary, but if we need clarification, we'll have you come off of mute. So just be prepared to do that. Make it as interactive as possible. You can simply say, hey, I would like to talk, and we'll go ahead from there. So that's getting that out of the way. Now, before I go into let me just do the safe harbor statement. And then what we're going to do is we're going to conduct a quick poll. And that poll is going to give us a better idea of who is attending. Do we have D&I leaders? Do we have, consultants? Or Workday administrators? Who is our audience? And then we could, tailor this if needed to that audience. But it's mostly for the administrators, so we can get this configuration up and working and get a clear understanding of how Vibe works, or Vibe Central works. So, okay, just quickly through the safe harbor statement. Now, as I answer some questions will definitely come up where there'll be some forward-looking statements, unreleased, could change, that type of thing. So we just want everybody to know that, we're going to do our best to answer those questions, but some things might change, right? And that's what safe harbor is all about. Okay, so let's go ahead and I will conduct the poll. So like I said, quick poll, just basically it's called Please Describe Yourself. I'm launching the poll now. And we'll give this about 45 seconds to a minute. Okay. That is, still have a couple. About 78% Workday. Let me share this with you. I'm going to end the poll. Give it 1 second. Okay, ending the poll, sharing the results. Yeah, I mean, most of us here are Workday administrators. Perfect, absolutely perfect. Do like to see the diversity inclusion leadership. Thank you for attending, and of course, report and analytics folks as well. You know, that 30 makes up the episode, but you know, it's really good to have all of you here with us today. I'm going to stop sharing that, and welcome. And okay, just a reminder, the only other thing you're going to have to do is the survey at the end. I can't emphasize this enough. The feedback is great. Really appreciate the feedback. You all have an opportunity. There'll be open text in there. Please provide feedback. That helps us get better, helps us make adjustments when we need to make adjustments. All right. So, you know, Vibe Central, we talk about Vibe Central. So Vibe Central, the way I like to discuss or describe Vibe Central, it's the one-stop shop, right? So where the best practice content lives. So you go to Vibe Central, you have access to everything you need to have a clear picture of your demographics, and basically it's a way to understand your people. And as leaders, understanding our organization, understanding who's in our organization, understanding our people is the key to success. So we are with Vibe. The Vibe methodology takes us beyond the limitations of representation alone. So, right, so we factor in inclusion, belonging, and equity, and we clearly define those terms and we measure them. That is the Vibe methodology. So basically, you know, what are we considering here? All right, so diverse representation, that's been our goal. It's an aspirational outcome, but that's been a goal for many years, right? So we've been literally working on this. I say we, I mean, you know, the nation or the world basically, and the business world specifically, has been really trying to figure this out for a long period of time. Okay, so we're talking we started collecting data on this and making progress in the diversity and inclusion arena for the last 30 years, if not more. But we've always had an issue with those outcomes not matching the intent. So it hasn't necessarily worked the way we want it to work. The problem is you have representation, but that does not mean that those individuals feel included. That does not mean our workforce, you know, that we're building a culture of belonging. And there are probably still some barriers that we have not, you know, broken through. The structural barriers of compensation, professional development, you know, the whole equity piece, right? And we want to measure that. Right? We want to make sure that we have an equitable pay structure. We want to make sure that our workforce, our people, feel like they're included. They feel like they belong. They feel like their voices are heard. So we want to capture their perspectives, and we want those perspectives, that influence, to drive meaningful change. And we also want to make sure that our efforts, our diversity and equity and inclusion efforts, match other company initiatives, organizational initiatives, and goals that are considered high priority. So the highest priority goals and initiatives that we have, diversity and inclusion, Vibe should be among them. So how can Workday help? Well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the tool. The Vibe Central can help you engage your employees, as we see here, by helping foster that inclusion and collecting those employee perspectives, which will drive the necessary change, right? That also feeds that decision-making, our leadership decision-making at all levels to do better based on the data that's presented. And also to develop talent. So we talk about talent acquisition, but we go beyond that. Talent acquisition is merely the beginning. That's where the representation comes in. We are talking about optimizing our tools to hire, promote, and monitor the progress of our team or our individuals throughout their work, throughout their journey with the company, right? So Vibe Central can help you do all of that. Most importantly, I believe, is that it's the driver to make positive changes and decisions, right? It's not like we set this up and then we're done. You know, we talk about the drive, talk about the commit, drive, thrive, right? This helps us go from the commit stage to the drive stage, which inevitably gets us to the thrive stage. And we can measure that. So now what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Collaborative Solutions. And this is going to be an awesome presentation. and I'm going to help get your questions answered. Thank you very much.
Mike, can you just confirm that you can see my screen?
I can totally see your screen. Screen. It looks beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. So I just want to take a couple minutes to talk about collaborative solutions and provide a little bit of background on the information that both Kyla and I represent. We're an HR, finance, and student transformational consulting agency focused on Workday. We started in 2003, and we're currently the longest tenured and most experienced Workday partner in the ecosystem. Additionally, we use Workday ourselves. We're customer number 26 for HCM and number 3 for financials. And as the name suggests, whenever we work with our customers, we try to take a collaborative approach on all aspects of the project. We have 800 customers, and part of that collaborative approach is making each interaction unique as well as successful. And we had a 98.7% customer satisfaction rating in 2020, which we're extremely proud of. We have offices all over North America, Europe, and the Asia Pacific region, and we offer follow the sun services. We've deployed in 125 countries, and I know it's not a country, but one of my favorites is when we deployed in Antarctica. I'm not sure if we're still the only partner that did that, but I'm still going to claim that continent. I'm still going to stick with it until I'm told otherwise. In addition to the traditional Workday consulting services, we also offer change management, strategic consulting, and post-go live services. Now, my main wheelhouse, and Kyla's as well, is the reporting space and post-production. So with that, I'm really keen on the two of them and developing long-term partnerships, helping folks realize the full potential of Workday. Kind of wrapping up this slide here, we're also very involved with philanthropy, and Autism Speaks is one of our primary focuses. We've raised over $300,000 to date for the organization, the cause that's near and dear to us. And with that, I'll just go ahead and segue into our topic on diversity and inclusion. So the theme of today is diversity and inclusion and enabling it. But, at Collaborative Solutions, I also want to mention a couple things about what we do with respect to it, so you can understand some of the folks and, why we feel like we want to just talk about this and help promote it a little bit as well. Our values center around being better together. It's one of our taglines. And we believe that every one of our employees owns the journey to a more diverse and inclusive workplace. We know that change doesn't happen easily, and we're committed to moving from awareness to action. We've developed things like micro learnings in many different communication forums to help teach and reinforce the habits that support inclusivity. And we want to reinforce those learnings as well, spaces throughout the organization. We have things like employee resource groups that bring people together, provide a safe place to share perspectives and experiences, as well as the opportunity to promote change within the workplace. You can see several of them on the screen to the right here, covering a variety of different topics. We have others. We have, I think at last count, I think we have 10 or 11, but we're a little limited with real estate, so I didn't put all of them on there. But I just wanted to provide a representative sample so you can see some of the things that we're working on. Pay parity. Mike kind of mentioned this earlier, but pay parity is a hot topic, and it's really been at the forefront of our minds long before it was legislated. We're proud that we can accurately say that we've had gender pay parity for some time now, and we're currently in the midst of applying that same framework into other demographics such as race and ethnicity, and things like Vibe help us get there. And we know, finally, we know that for us to grow, we have to be honest about where we are at our current state. Our demographics for age, race, ethnicity, gender, and all of that, they're listed on our website. And we're committed to transparency with that, not only in the organization, but also externally as well. And the more that we progress, the more meaningful our work is going to be, and the better that we can meet the needs of the ecosystem. We have a lot of milestones ahead of our journey, but I think that Vibe is the natural evolution that's not only going to help us get there, but it's going to help you get there as well. So with that said, let's kind of jump into the agenda of what we're going to be doing today. Now, from an agenda perspective, we're gonna talk a little bit from an overview of what Vibe Central is and decision making around it. We'll showcase some of the dashboards a bit, and we'll discuss the process to implement it. There's going to be a break about halfway through for folks to stretch, get up, get a cup of coffee, and things like that. And we'll move into enablement and configuration of the dashboard. And then we'll wrap it up talking about an optional pieces of functionality and benchmarking. Now, one of the big goals, and really the whole reason we're here, is for everyone who has configuration ability to follow along. There's a bit of pre-work, which was recommended prior to this, and if that was completed, we aim to have Vibe set up in your environment within the next couple of hours. This whole session, as you can see, is also being recorded. So should you need to watch it later, there's a step that was missed, or there's some tips and tricks that we're going to provide throughout, you're going to be able to do so. And I don't know about you, but Friday night, my house is movie night. So this might be a good idea for movie night, so think about that. All right, so let's jump into an overview of Vibe Central and really kind of asking the question, what is it? What is Vibe Central? Vibe Central is a consolidated area where you can leverage the reports and tasks associated with Vibe, associated with diversity. And one of the biggest areas that businesses are focusing on, or at least they were before the pandemic, is overall inclusiveness of the workplace. The data is being captured on a regular basis within Workday. And for those countries which is tracked, this is a jump start on making use of the data. As to what that use is, I think that's a great question for your organization, but we're seeing a lot of organizations simply start to get their hands around their population and how it's made up, and allowing them to start asking challenging questions towards being more inclusive. And this is going to be a little bit different than Vibe Index, not to confuse the names, but Vibe Index alongside Prism helps you expand on that story further and start assigning some numeric values from a score perspective. Now, our focus today is going to be almost 100% on Vibe Central, because not only is it part of the core subscription that you have, but it's also a very easy way to get immediate value from the system and all the transactions that you're running. Now, alongside everything else that we're talking about today, additional information, step-by-step guides, support, help, etc., can all be found on the community pages dedicated to Vibe. And throughout the day, we'll start linking you to them as well. So let's expand on the question that we kind of asked in the previous slide around what Vibe Central is. Prior to Vibe, Workday delivered a diversity dashboard, and really think of this as just the natural evolution of it. A few tasks have become easier in your environment, including turning on trending and benchmarking, and some of the tools that you would want to look at diversity have become a lot simpler. Now, the core thought around all this is how the story is captured and rather told, and how we can deliver a message around understanding your population. And we do this by developing dashboards, by building dashboards and reports that are in specific focus areas, hire, promotion, leadership, attrition, and then an overall summary page. Now, that's important because this is all information that is delivered, and it's simply a matter of turning it on, which is what we're going to do today. But again, I just kind of want to reinforce that this is really an enhanced version of the diversity dashboard. And as you start talking to your leadership, as you start talking to folks who want to know more about what it is, that's a great starting point to kind of launch those kinds of conversations. Now, there's 15 delivered reports, and there is the delivered dashboard with 5 sections split out. So it's a pretty good baseline moving forward. So let's go through a couple questions, which we anticipate Vibe is going to be able to answer for you. And a lot of these questions are things that we've heard and we've had to solve for on client cases or during implementations. Things like, what are our turnover rates based on gender and ethnicity? I mean, I think that probably in the past month, I read a report about job losses during the pandemic and how it relates to different demographics like females or specific ethnicities. And these questions can be extremely difficult to work through, and they can be extremely difficult to address. And that's where one of Vibe's strengths is being able to provide data towards evaluating that question. I mean, I'm a huge fan of understanding the diversity makeup within different teams. Within my organization, there are trends that I can personally see based upon tribal knowledge, but tribal knowledge does not equivalent to business decisions. You need to have data behind it. And if you can look at that data with an aspect of time, you might be able to start seeing natural shifts and make predictive or proactive actions towards fostering that correct environment. So all of that said, I think probably what makes the most sense is to hop into a demo of the system. And you'll kind of see this today as we go through a bunch of slides, is we'll talk about things in the system, and then we'll try to demo it as well. So let's see if I can get out of this. Perfect. So I have my Workday test tenant up on the screen here. And it's a GMS tenant, and with that, it's got a lot of staged and fake data, and it's not very robust in terms of the data that's available, but it'll be good to provide you a kind of a representation of what Vibe looks like. And I'm going to go down to my dashboard section because I already have all of this set up, and I want to show you the completed product before we go too far into it. So I'm going to go into my dashboards, and I have a dashboard called diversity. The dashboard is not named Vibe. This is going to be, as we mentioned earlier, an enhanced version of the diversity dashboard. So it still lives on that dashboard named diversity. And it's a more intuitive name for folks to access this information as well. And immediately you'll see that when we go into the dashboard, there's a couple of things going on here. And I'll kind of step through every one of them just in case you haven't seen dashboards or maybe you're not familiar with them. Across the top of the screen, we have what are called announcements inside of Workday. And they allow you to put messages on the screen, maybe a message from our Chief Diversity Officer around what Vibe is. Maybe it's something around a video that we want to play. Or maybe it's something that has external links. I realize the text is kind of small. I'll zoom in here in a little bit, but there's some announcements that you can use to draw people's attention to certain things or certain things that you want to say on the dashboard. But really the star of the dashboard and what we're looking at are these reports. And we have these reports, I should probably zoom in. We have these reports on the dashboard with several different tabs here at the top. We have a summary tab, we have a hires tab, we have a promotions tab, and every one of these dashboards contains different reports on them. So the hires tab has something about quarterly diversity metrics based upon gender in the different time periods. Leadership is focused on people that are in specific job profiles or specific management levels. And this is important because you can divide your reports out into different sections and help tell a story. Now I'm going to go to I think it was the hires tab I was planning on showing you. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what the reports can do as well, because there's a lot of people who see reports in Workday, but they don't necessarily know that you can interact with them. And a lot of these reports come with interactability. I'm just going to make up words here, but you can interact with a lot of these reports straight out of the box and then enhance them as time goes on. So I'm going to look at the quarterly diversity metrics gender hire report. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but I can see that there's different time periods here on the left. We've got 2020 Q1. 2020 Q2, Q3, Q4, and then Q1 again. And I can see how my data is changing over time. So let's use 2020 Q3 as an example. So I'm just going to hover over this. I have 3 females that were hired during this quarter. I have 4 males, and I have 0 people hired that did not declare gender. And then I can hover over the data as well and see based upon the legend, okay, 3 females were hired in this quarter. Now, this is where a lot of people stop, but there's so much more that you can do with this data. So for example, I have 4 males that were hired. If I click on this data, what it's going to allow me to do is to drill into the data and then add another slicer to it. So these are called drillable fields. And by clicking on it, I bring up this menu. And within here, I am going to pull these people out based upon management level. So it's going to take those 4 males in management level is probably the worst thing. Let me select something else, excuse me. I'm going to pull out these 4 people based upon job family. And I can see of those 4 people, 3 are in a job family for call center and 1 is in a consulting services job family. And you can keep drilling down into the data towards telling a story. Now, you can also hover over the data again. And if you wanted to continue drilling in, you have the ability to do so. So I'm going to view this data and I'm just going to view it by, I don't know, hiring source. And it's going to tell me how all of these people were found and recruited into my system. Now, I don't have information around diversity for these hires and whatnot, but those are fields that you can drill into as well. And if at any point you want to get kind of a little bit more of an Excel-like or like a spreadsheet-like format, then you also have the ability to click on the data and actually see it in what is effectively an advanced report. And this is called detailed data. So the reason I bring up the drillable fields and the reason I bring up the detailed data is, to me, these reports in Vibe, if nothing else, it is an amazing foundation for you to build from. Maybe there's other fields in here. Maybe hiring source isn't important to your organization. So after you get these reports loaded, you can adjust them to meet your business needs. You can enhance them to provide more information, less information. You can enhance them to add more drillable fields, less drillable fields, whatever it means to your organization. You can tailor these reports to meet that need. Now, we're not going to spend too much time talking about the tailoring of reports. That's a good phase 2 for you. But I saw there's a lot of reporting administrators on the phone, and I'm sure that they probably already know how to do this. We'll touch on this a little bit as we look at some custom reports, just to kind of give you an idea. But the key words here are this is detailed data, and then the ability to interact and then slice data out are known as drillable fields. Now, there's one more thing I want to kind of show you before we go back to the presentation, and that's an optional piece of functionality that we'll talk about here in a second. And that is these little black lines that are kind of seen on this graph sometimes. This is known as benchmarking. And Workday provides you the ability to benchmark your data against other organizations in the same industry that are also on the Workday platform. So I can see that with respect to females, 43.7% of, geez, it's kind of tough to hover over, sorry. 43.7% of the of the industry is female promotions or female hires. Well, I can see that from a promotion perspective, we're absolutely smoking this. We're at 66.7%, and the industry average is 43.7. So I'm stacking up pretty well compared to some of my competitors or compared to some of my peers. This kind of information, though, isn't necessary. It's kind of a value add. It's kind of a bonus. So we'll spend a little time talking about how you can set that up, how you can opt into it, and how you can get going with it. But know that you can go through the entire workshop today without ever touching benchmarking. It's just a nice to have piece of functionality. All right. So all of that said, let's jump back in if you do not mind. And let's kind of talk about how we can track progress and how we can make decisions. And looking at things from a key business perspective, that's fine. But we can get more granular than that when it comes to Vibe and when it comes to the reports and what we're trying to do. So what we have here on the screen are a lot of those questions, a lot of those decisions based upon the employee lifecycle in Workday that we're trying to ask within Vibe, or that we're trying to answer within Vibe as well. And you kind of saw that. But what I want y'all to get from this, or what I want y'all to kind of see, is I want you to see some of the questions that you hear that Vibe is hopefully going to give you that leg up on answering. And a lot of these are influenced by diversity. What's our external optics? If an auditing firm came and looked at our data, if our diversity officer came and wanted to look at the data, what would they be saying? And you'll hear me say this a lot. You'll hear me talk about these questions a lot because I'm a big fan of it. And using data is a great way to either figure out what questions you need to be asking or provide some context to why things are the way they are. And gender, diversity, pay equity, all these things you're tracking in Workday in some capacity. It's about gluing them together, or it's about finding where the overlap is towards making the right decisions. And that's going to bring us to the Vibe Central dashboard and what it takes to actually implement it. So we've talked about it from a high level. Let's go through a couple of the nuts and bolts in terms of the implementation and what we're going to be doing here today. Now there's 5 steps, and it's going to seem a little overwhelming at first, but when we break it down, it becomes a little bit more clear. And again, all of this is detailed out further in community. We're going to go through it in the presentation, so I don't want you to rush to write things down. The first 4 steps are kind of the critical ones though, and the 5th one is an optional, very nice to have. So first up, it's about downloading the report package from Customer Central into your tenant. And that was a prerequisite for today. So hopefully everyone has gone through that and downloaded it, because it's going to be the baseline for what we're doing. Afterwards, we're going to spend time on the configuration of data sources with respect to trended workers, my favorite data source. We're going to talk through security. We're going to talk through dashboards towards launching Vibe. And then we're going to wrap it up with benchmarking as well at the end. So let's talk, go ahead. Okay, sorry, I felt like I got a little background noise. It might have been me. So let's start with the implementation process and actually download the report package. And it really all begins with Customer Central. Now, I understand this was supposed to be a prerequisite, but just in case it wasn't, Customer Central is a separate Workday tenant, and it's designed to simplify and centralize the deployment process. It doesn't hold any customer data, but what it does do is it provides a platform for all the implementation tools that y'all have access to. You can typically access it by submitting a ticket through the tenant automation request process using your name support contact. So it's kind of a mouthful to say, but if you need access to the Customer Central tenant and you don't have it, you need to download report packages or other cool configuration from Workday in the future, you want to find out who your name support contact is. It's usually one of your primary Workday administrators, but if you ask them, they should be able to tell you who the name support contact is. So, you know, make sure if you don't have access and you want access to look into that a little bit more with them. Now, everything that we're doing today can be downloaded and should have been downloaded from Customer Central. There's 2 exceptions though, and they're related to benchmarking. We have 2 reports that are dedicated to benchmarking with Customer Central. So just we'll call that out when we get there. And just as a friendly reminder, just to go on mute if you don't mind. So one of the big things that we're going to be doing today is we're going to be configuring a trended worker. And I could talk about this for longer than it takes to set up. Go ahead. Is there a question?
I have a question. Yeah,
Sure.
I have a question about Customer Central. Is it created for a given customer, or it is like a GMS tenant that anyone gets access to?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It is a single tenant that houses the configuration. So there's not a tenant created specifically for your organization. Rather, it's a shared tenant across a lot of organizations just to pull stuff from.
Got it. Okay, it's very similar to GMS then. You just get login details once you put in a request that you need access to Customer Central, and just create a specific login ID for you to be able to log in.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great way to think about it. There's no customer data in it. There's no stage data that I know of. It's purely just to house configuration using the Workday object model.
Right, and it's always a good idea because this is where all the config is there. So it doesn't matter whether you're downloading this, but good idea to best practice to have access to this, right?
I would absolutely agree, especially if you're responsible for configuration. It would be a good idea to have access to this. And you know, when you need access to it, it's always like an emergency. So if you foresee yourself needing to download configuration in the future, I think it's worth talking to your name support contact just to make sure that you have access for when you need it. Be proactive.
Got it. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Harvey.
Absolutely. All right. So, you know, we kind of talked a little bit about trending and how it's easy to set up, but security aside, it takes a few minutes to configure and start the generation process inside of Workday. We're going to spend far more time talking about it and explaining than it does to not only set up, but also generate and then start getting data back. If you already have trended workers set up, this whole thing might be a non-issue for you. Maybe you'll pick something up, or maybe you can share some best practices when we get to that section. And really the process for setting it up is going to be around enabling it. We're going to establish some configuration security. We're going to start the generation process. We're going to start the trickle process. And then we're going to start seeing some data appear in reports, and we're going to get some new reports in the system. So it's a lot more complicated on the screen than it is in reality. After we set up trending, we're going to go in and we're going to enable the diversity dashboard. This is the third step. We're going to have the reports already in because we migrated them from Customer Central. We're going to have the data there because we already submitted it via trending. And now it's about establishing that framework for where the reports are going to sit. And really the big component there is security and how you can access it. And that's going to be a common theme throughout. It is going to be configuring security to align with your business needs. We have a lot of the high level steps here, but when we go through these processes, we'll put it on the screen and then we'll actually show you in the system and allow you to walk through it with us. And it's not so much going to be find this and set it up. We'll commonly walk through and show you how we access the domain, how you can edit it, how you can add the permissions, etc. So we hope to make this as follow along as possible. And then kind of continuing down the track of steps here, the fourth and final step is to configure the dashboard. We're going to have all the foundational data there, and it's going to be around tweaks towards deploying the dashboard, which are going to be listed on the screen, maintaining the dashboard, adding tabs. If you want to add announcements, you can. You want to map prompts, you can do so as well. We'll go through these in more detail, but after this step is complete, you will have the data, you will have the dashboard, and you'll be able to start accessing it in the system. And then, should you be interested, and this is going to be the tail end of the presentation, we're going to cover benchmarking. It's going to require an opt-in to innovation services within Workday. We'll talk through what it looks like, but it's really kind of an easy process to get some extremely valuable data out of it. But we'll talk about what it means to enable it. We'll talk about what it looks like for you. And if you're maybe you're in a smaller industry that doesn't have as much benchmarking data, we'll talk about what that means for you versus a large organization that has, substantial data in the ecosystem. So we have one more slide before we actually get into the configuration here. And it's just to talk through a few key points. We mentioned that Vibe, it's an expansion of the diversity dashboard. That's true. But if you're already using the delivered dashboard, you're going to be able to still implement Vibe. And you could place this on a custom dashboard if you want it. We're going to be doing everything as if you don't have it set up, but just know that if you are using the diversity dashboard, or if you are using it in production and you want to add a custom dashboard for Vibe later, it's extremely easy to do so. And when we go through the demonstration, we'll talk through some of those instances on what you would do slightly differently. And it's really nothing except specifying where reports can be shared, where reports can sit on dashboards. So it's a very straightforward process. Now, all the configuration that we're going to be running through uses and follows the best practices, including the four main tabs of the Vibe index inputs: hire, promotions, leadership, and attrition. We'll be focused on the 15 delivered custom reports that go in based upon trending, and then we'll run through benchmarking. So if you have the configuration guide in front of you as well, we may not follow it exactly, but we're going to be going through all of the same steps. So it's all going to be essentially a demonstration of how to do this configuration. So before we get started, anyone have additional questions?
Looks like we're ready.
All right, let's how to get a drink real quickly. So configuring worker trending. First thing we're going to do is we're going to configure this and talk about security. So the first thing that we need to really kind of do is discuss security to access these tasks. Trending is one of the most valuable data sources in the system, but it requires some setup. And this is a great screen to screenshot, or if you have the documentation, or if you want to write it down, because I'm going to talk about it for a minute, you're welcome to do so. But the first item to note is around creating fiscal schedules. And this isn't something that's required. But if you view your data, if you're an organization that views your data based upon fiscal schedules, which don't align with the typical year-month calendar schedule, and a year-month calendar schedule being January, February, March, April, etc. If you're an organization that doesn't do that, you might want to consider setting up fiscal schedules. Fiscal schedules allow you to specify more periods in a year, such as a 13 period or a 14 period working year. And there are implications and there are changes that occur to worker trending when you do this. We'll talk about those in a minute. But odds are, if you're an organization that needs to see fiscal schedules, they're probably already set up in your tenant in some capacity. And I would say that if you use them, let's check it out and let's see if they're there. When we go through our implementation today, we're not going to use fiscal schedules. We're going to use the year-month format. And we'll talk through some of those changes for fiscal schedules as they come up. A kind of a common thing is, if your organization differs a little bit from what we're doing today, it's usually extremely easy to go back and make an adjustment to adhere to that. So, don't worry too much if you have to stray from what we're doing here. And let's see, next up is the dashboard. So Vibe exists on a dashboard, and we need the ability to set up dashboards, so that explains that security. Things like the ability to prompt and establish the scope of the data through prompt sets is important, which is why we're going to require edit access to prompt sets. And most of the data that we're working with today is based on trending, and you'll need the ability to both turn on trended data through tenant setup, as well as generate it through the trended worker data option. And then kind of moving down to the last one, you're probably not setting up these dashboards in production, or at least I would recommend that we set them up in a test environment first. So if you do any setup, if you do any tweaking, you're going to probably want access to object transporter to move this configuration between tenants. So that said, I'll just pause here for a couple more seconds in case folks are writing anything down. So composition, not compensation. We can talk about compensation, but so composition. Before we actually go in and set up a trended worker, we have to talk about what makes it up, because a lot of folks are not necessarily in tune with what trended worker is. It's not a very commonly used data source, despite it being one of the most valuable. In a few words, trended worker allows us to view data and add a component of time onto it, which is its biggest strength. And this makes up a combination of those transactions you enter into Workday. It also makes up, snapshots also contribute to it as well. There's over 100 fields that are currently configured in the system today, and you also have the ability to add on additional ones as needed. We won't go into great detail about that, but I'd encourage everyone, after we go through the trended setup, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but after we go through the trended setup, explore expanding it out and explore adding additional fields and organizations to it to kind of meet your goals. Reporting on data over time, as Kyla can tell you, reporting on data over time, it's one of the more difficult things to do in Workday without this data source. And this data source is essentially an easy way for you to get that baseline, to get that framework. And once you configure it, your reporting capabilities and what you're able to do is going to dramatically increase. So it's a pretty powerful tool here. And while the data is great, there also has to be rules around how it's used in order to generate correctly. We'll reinforce this throughout, but it's important to start on the right-hand side first. Data will go back in trended workers for 36 periods. If you're using a year-month format for trending, where there's 12 months in a year, unless there's different calendars that I'm not aware of, that's going to mean 3 years of rolling data. If you're using fiscal schedules, it's 36 periods, which can be less than 3 years of data. So for example, if you use a fiscal calendar with 14 periods in a year, that might result in only 2.75-ish years worth of data in trended workers. So how you set up trended workers will dictate how much history, and at most, it's up to 36 periods worth of data, which is commonly 3 years. And we're going to generate this data. We're going to submit this data via a job, which can take a little time. And afterwards, to keep the data up to date, a trickle process runs daily in the background without your involvement. So after we generate the data, it's pretty hands off.
Hey, Harvey.
Yes.
Good question. So I'm quite not 100% understanding the regular worker data versus trended worker data. What is the technical difference?
Absolutely. So if you build a report in the system on worker data, let's just say that we build a report on worker data in the system and we return the hires. Well, we're going to get a excuse me. If we build a report in the system on people's just job, we're going to see a snapshot of where they are today. But what if you want to see where that person was a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago? How do you do that in terms of reporting? Well, what Trended Worker allows you to do is add that aspect of time onto it. So you're able to see, I was in this position in January. In December, I was in this position. In October, November, this position. So it assigns dates to different snapshots of data and allows you to see people with that aspect of time included automatically. So yeah, let me hop into the tenant real quickly and just show you kind of what that looks like here. Let's see.
So basically historical data.
Historical data, yep, up to 36 periods. And of course, I can't find a great example, but using that example of hires earlier, this is how many hires I had in Q1, Q2, and I can see this data graphically over time.
So we don't have to define any date ranges or anything in this configuration or filter. That's the main benefit here, right?
So all the reports that come, a lot of the reports that are being delivered by Workday will automatically have that time period taken care of, if you will, within the report itself. And based upon how we set up our periods, whether it's year, month, or fiscal schedule, that'll dictate the time periods across the board. So if I'm using a year-month format, I have the 12 months of the year. So I can show my data over the monthly ranges of January, February, March, April as different points on the graph.
Okay, I see. So the time frame is customizable when we create the report as well, like for custom reports.
Correct. The time frame is customizable. Now, that's not to say that it's as customizable as possible. I'm trying to think. There are certain parameters that we have to adhere to. We can't have different timeframes in one report, but you're able to tailor the reports to a common timeframe as necessary.
I see. Okay. Thanks for the understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the questions. I do a ton of talking, so I do love the questions. All right. So when we go through and we submit the Trended Worker data, because it has to look at history and because history can be kind of beefy, we have to submit a job to generate the data. And once we submit the job, that kind of kicks the process off. It takes a little time. Usually it takes a couple hours to do, but it runs in the background. And the important thing is once you kick it off that one time, it's gonna continue to run and operate on an ongoing basis where every day a new job starts to calculate all of the changes in the previous 24 hours or so. Now, as for what that job does or what trended data captures, it captures both the activity and snapshot-based transactions. So if you have a staffing activity, if you move a worker, if you terminate someone, those are activity-based transactions. They follow workflows. Snapshots is more of a point-in-time picture of the data on the last day of the period. So it helps you show from a high level how data is changing over time. A good example of snapshot is what is our employee count in January versus February versus March. You can see how your organization is growing. Then throw in some gender, ethnicity, age group related aspects to that, and you can see how your population is molding over time. Now, when we talk about training, we really want to focus on vibe because that's why we're all here today. But once you turn it on, there's a lot of reporting options that are going to open up to you. There's over 60 delivered reports within trending, and I'll show you how you can access them. And like I said before, y'all know I'm fans of it, But I highly suggest that once you turn it on, look at the delivered functionality. Think about what you can do to make it work for you. You're going to have all these delivered reports. You can copy them. You can tailor them to a story you want to tell. It's great to have a promotion rate report, but what if we want to take it and tell a story about promotion rate with respect to location? Maybe one location has more promotions than another. Why? Or, diversity. If you want to know, are we promoting males more than females? Are we promoting people of color more than people of a different color? It's a great tool to have, and trending is going to allow you to do that, assuming that you have the data in Workday, which, we all pretty much do from an activity perspective, though the capturing of employee data is very dependent on organizations and regionality as well. So kind of what I want you to get from this, as someone who's been reporting for 10 years in the ecosystem, I never build a report from scratch anymore. There's almost always something that's delivered that I can use as a framework to go from. You're getting a phenomenal framework, and it's about leveraging it. So don't reinvent that wheel. Leverage that framework for anything else that you need to do. All right, I'm going to go to a demo here in a couple more slides, but just a couple more things to cover is what actually comes with trending. There's a great report in Workday that will demo. It's called the Business Object Details Report, and that's going to help you explore the options within the data source. You can be able to leverage a report, see which reports leverage a specific data source. Again, it's probably easier to showcase through a demo than explaining, so I won't spend too much time on here. We also have fields as well. There's a number of fields that are delivered. Again, we'll show you how to access this so you don't have to write it down, but here's some good examples of what we see inside of the trended data source. We see a lot of transactional data fields. We see a lot of snapshot-based fields. And, there's a great way to view this, which we'll get to in a second, but I wanted to highlight metrics on the next slide, because metrics are helpful to understand and leverage as they're the calculations on the business object. If you want to create custom calculations, you need a starting point. How do you count the number of people that are hired? I could build calc fields to do it, but that doesn't mean that everyone can. So there's metrics that are delivered to help give you that starting point, or to help give you an easy field to reference without going through the process of complicated calc fields. For every snapshot that's produced, every trickle that runs with trending, all of this stuff is recalculated towards keeping the data up to date on a daily basis. And I think the only other thing I want to mention here that some folks sometimes notice is on the right-hand side, under organization, you don't see anything around custom organizations, but we'll show you how to include them so you can reference them within the reports. And then finally, I just want to round out the list before we go into the demo. And I want to do so by calling out record date and record type fields. So record date, and then I didn't highlight record type. You'll have to forgive me there. But these two fields are going to kind of be the basis for a lot of what we're doing. Record date and record type fields, they're commonly calculated as of the last date in the period, unless it's an activity-based transaction, in which case they are your effective date. But they help, record type helps you differentiate between activity and snapshot, whereas record date gives you an effective date to associate with the data. It's a lot to pull in. So what probably makes the most sense is let's go in and let's just jump into the system and kind of show you the trended worker object, and then we'll actually go through the setup of it. So let's see if we can get this going. I'm not sure how many people have seen this business object detail report, but it's always helpful to reference. So I'm going to select the report, and I'm going to search for my field of trended worker. That's that beautiful Montana internet that the pigeons have to fly faster to carry the data and return it to my computer. All right, so we're on the business object detail report for trended worker. And what I wanted to show you on here is, okay, so we had a lot of these images on the slide, right? That was great. But how you can access them is by looking at the fields. I have 165 fields here, and they're all broken out by categories. So if I wanted to see all the fields that were related to compensation, I could do so. I could see that I have 5 fields. And then I also have the description, whether it's Workday delivered, the field type, etc. And what I really wanted y'all to get to is, if having this information laid out in a spreadsheet-like fashion is useful to you, business object detail is a great way to get to that data. Kind of more importantly though, if you ever look at this, you can also see, some business object details for trended workers. I can see all the data sources associated with trended workers. In this instance, there's only one, but if you were doing something on like a worker data source, you might see 15 or 20 and help you differentiate between which data source is appropriate for what you want to do. The really big thing though is this reports tab right here. This reports tab allows you to see all of the delivered and all of the custom reports that exist on this data source. So if you want to build a report, and you want to build a report around, I don't know, compa ratio by gender, or you want to build a report based upon gender and just see what's available, you can come in here, you can find this, and you can go, oh, I have an average compa ratio by gender report. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy that into a custom report and tailor it to my needs. Or maybe this fits your needs, but it's an easy way for you to see what are the possibilities, especially when you turn on Trended Worker. So that said, you'll have to forgive me. I have a couple more slides just talking about Trended Worker, and then we'll actually go through and do the setup of it. And we'll kind of go through the setup side by side. Now, there are some specifics that we need to do before we actually get in and do the setup itself. And it's not so much things that we need, but they're helpful fields to set up, or rather just validate. And I'll preface this by saying that these fields are likely already set up. When you went through an implementation, you probably set up gender. You probably set up tenure categories, but maybe you didn't. So we have the setup, we have the tasks to access these on the lower left-hand side of your screen. And if you want to view them at any point in the future, please feel free to do so. Now, these three that we have here are very common for trending. There's one more that I would just suggest that people view as well, and that's ethnicity. And it's just helpful to view, do you have your gender set up correctly? Do you have your tenure category set up correctly? Do you have your age band set up correctly? And do you have your ethnicity set up correctly? Tenure categories, just to explain a couple of these terms, tenure categories are normally how long you've been with a company, 0 to 1 year, or on the upper right-hand side, 2 to 5 year, 5 to 10, 15 to 20. And then age band is typically what we see on the upper left. It's just with respect to your birth date that's captured in Workday. How is your population made up? 20 and under, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, etc. So it's a way to divide out, it's multiple ways to divide out people in your workforce. Now, record date, we talked about this a little bit, but I just want to reinforce the point. There's going to be two types of transactions when it comes to worker trending. First is activity-based. Activities are the transactions that have an effective date. I'm hired effective April 1st. That's a joke. I'm hired effective June 15th, or I'm undergoing a job change next week, and the date of my job change is the effective date. Those are things that you enter as part of transactions. So it's relatively hands-off. As long as the data that you're entering is accurate, the activity is going to update as expected. Snapshots are going to be just that. They're snapshots. They're pictures of data as of the last day in a period. And we have it in the slide here, but I think an example kind of helps. So if we have someone like Betty Lou, she receives a promotion effective on January 1st. That's the record date for the transaction. That's a record date for the activity. That's the effective date. But if you look at a snapshot for January, it'll have her in that position effective January 31st. So if Betty was to go through a job change halfway through the month, you'll see it as an activity, but you won't see it in the snapshot. The snapshot's going to be wherever she was on the last day of the period. We talked a little bit about it, but I want to drive home the fact that there is stuff delivered for a trended worker, and you can customize it. We have the ability to customize organizations, and when we actually go through the field, we'll talk about it. But there's so much more you can do. So please don't just stop trended workers with what we're doing with Vibe today. Kind of keep going and kind of keep exploring it. Now, the deployment of trended worker, there's 4 steps that we do, and we'll follow these 4 steps here, kind of side by side. But there's some other things that might be, I don't want to say might be missing, but there's tenant setup that we need to do. And then before we actually go in and maintain trended workers, I would just always advise people go in, take a look at your setup values, take a look at those tenant values like gender, ethnicity, to make sure that they're what you want them to be before you start creating the data. Because you don't want to be in a situation, I mean, if you are, it's not a big deal, but you don't want to be in a situation where you kind of go through the setup and then you have to delete the data that you generated and go back and regenerate it, and just kind of slow you down a little bit. So let's go ahead and let's just actually go through the deployment process with a step-by-step. And the first thing that we do is we need to actually enable trending in tenant setup, reporting, and analytics. So there's a screenshot on the screen, and this is going to be good for later, but I'm going to go ahead and just jump into it and show you what it looks like. So if you go into Edit Tenant Setup, Reporting and Analytics, and you may or may not have access. So if you don't have access to this, this is going to put a little roadblock on it. You might need to get an administrator to come in and do this for you. But under Edit Tenant Setup, Reporting and Analytics, there's a lot of stuff in here. But really what we're looking for is this field right here under Worker Trending that says Enable Worker Trending. And what this field is going to do is it's not going to start the process. It's just going to say, okay, you have the ability to go in and actually change trended worker options. You have the ability to start generating it if you so choose to. It's essentially turning on the trended functionality. And then after you do that, we have another slide here. And again, I'll just kind of demo it, but it's around maintaining the trended workers. So step number 2 is going to be running a task called Maintain Trended Workers. So once we turn on trending, we can search Workday and we'll search for the term Maintain Trended Workers. And you know what? I'm kind of thinking to myself here that we might not, it might help to talk a little bit about security before we go any further. So let me ask this question. Let me just kind of put a pause right here before I go any further. Was there anyone that had trouble turning on trending before we go any further? Or is there anyone that was not able to turn on the access to get to this page of Edit Tenant Setup? And I take silence as a no, by the way. So if no one talks, that's perfectly fine. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go forward with the assumption that everyone had access to that. Everyone took care of the security prerequisite steps. If for any reason you didn't, there is a report called Security for Secureable Item that you could do. You could search for the task name and you could pull back the associated security. If anyone has difficulty with accessing tasks, by all means, just chime in and we'll talk about how you can access the domains to get there.
Hi, Harvey. Can we pull any information from custom objects?
So the question was, can you pull information from custom objects into worker trending?
Yep.
Let's talk about that in a couple minutes when we actually are on the configuration screen for trended workers. Is that okay?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. All right. So we have trending turned on. I'm going to go into a task now called Maintain Trended Workers. And this is a really cool task because this is like the springboard, if you will, where this is where worker trending is. Actually, let me go back and just purge my worker trending data really quickly. And the reason I want to do that is I want to start from scratch, just like y'all are. So I'm in a task called Maintain Trended Workers. And if you're in this task and you successfully enabled it in Edit Tenant Setup, you'll see this checkbox called Enable Worker Trending, and it'll be checked. Now, let's just go ahead and skip the status screen for now. And let's go to the configuration screen. What the configuration screen is this is where you need to input the data to make trending successful. And first up is the trending start date. And that's a starting point for data. Commonly, it'll be your go live date. but it doesn't have to be. Trended data is only going to go back 36 periods. And if I use a year-month calendar, well, 2013 is not realistic. So I don't want to say it doesn't matter what this date is. You want the date to be as far back as you can reasonably think, but trended workers only going to go back 36 periods. Now, if I set this date to be something like today, then I'm not going to get much data on trending. So set it to be at least your go live date, if not a little bit further back to reflect the history that you have. Next up is the number of retroactive periods. And one of the really cool things about this screen is you can hover over almost all the fields and it explains it to you. But the retroactive periods, it determines how far back changes are incorporated into the trended data source from the trickle. So when we generate data for the trended for the first time, it's going to go back and it's going to generate data for the previous 36 periods. But what happens if we do a retroactive job change 2 months ago or 2 periods ago? This field allows, or it tells Workday how many periods back to include adjustments like that in the trickle. The maximum that you can set it to be is 3. So I have yet to see a use case for anything else. I would recommend that you set this number at 3. So if you get any changes in 3 retroactive periods, it's considered for trending and it brings it in. Next up is the trending period, and trending period, how you determine the time frame for trending. When you think about periods, in a normal calendar year, there's 12 periods in a month. If you're calendar based, it's year month, which is January, February, etc. If it's fiscal based, you'll select that. And if you select a fiscal calendar, then you're also going to have to select a fiscal schedule that's associated with it. If you're not, if you just base everything on January, February, March, like a lot of organizations do, then you won't be able to specify a fiscal schedule. Next up is include terminations on period end date. And this might be one of the more confusing fields here. So I'm going to do my best to explain it. If you want workers terminated on the last day of a period, so on like the 31st of January, to be included in the ending headcount for that period, you would enable this box. By default, Trended Workers processes any terminations prior to the ending headcount snapshot. So if you check this box, workers with a termination event effective the last day of the period are shown as active on the last day of the period. So if you think about people who, maybe I'm being terminated on the 31st, but I'm going to come into work and people are going to throw me a huge party and it's a great time. Well, if I need to be active in that month, then you would want to check this box. And we have a slide to show you this in example format next. I would say that most organizations I see use this box and check it, though it depends on your organization needs. And finally, the last one is use international assignments. And what this allows you to do is to include international assignments in the headcount for Trended Workers. So if I'm on an international assignment, should my international assignment be my primary position? Or should it be my regional position that's in my home country? Most organizations will leave this one unchecked. If you want international assignments to be the primary, then you would check this field. Now, I want to go back and I want to answer the question that was asked, but before I do so, I want to just spend a minute talking about terminations on period end date options and kind of show you an example here, because it's confusing as can be. When that field for terminations is unchecked, if you have a termination on December 31st, it's going to count towards December. It's going to count towards that year. Whereas if it's checked, it'll count against January. A great use case, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, is if you have individuals who show up on the termination date and they need to be considered employees. Maybe they're turning in equipment, maybe they're attending a party, or y'all throwing like a parade for them. Then that might be a reason why you would check it. But here's a great example just to show you what it looks like from a headcount and from a termination perspective with respect to your activity-based data and your snapshot-based data. Now, we don't need to do we don't need to do anything else in here. But I want to just take an extra minute and kind of explain some of these things to you if y'all don't mind. And first up is the organizations field. When you look at custom fields in the system, I have two custom fields here. I have growth, share, and I have division. Not custom fields, custom organizations. They're not automatically included with trending because they're not Workday delivered fields. So you need to tell trending, you need to, that, hey, trending, you need to consider these custom organizations. So what you're able to do is you're able to specify up to 10 custom organizations. And you can associate existing custom organizations. So for example, HR security custom organization. And now I can pull this field into the trended worker data source. And if I want to reference it in any of my reports, like I want to slice data and this is the x-axis, I'm going to reference this field of trended worker organization 3, which corresponds to HR security custom organization. So it's a way for you to pull in custom organizations if you need to do so. And then question was asked around, can we bring in custom objects or custom fields and things like that? And the short of it is, yes, you can. You can always build reports with trending, and then you can do something like a lookup related value field where you look up the worker and you return the custom object. But that's not very efficient because every time you run the report, you need to do that lookup for every single person who returns in a report. So it can be kind of time intensive. Well, one of the things that you can do with trended workers is under this section, you can also just define up to 5 additional fields based upon either the position, the worker, or the worker business process, and bring those fields in. So for example, I want to bring in a worker, and I want to bring in a single instance field, and I don't know what fields I have, but I'm just going to search. I have a lookup current manager field. Well, if I entered this and I click OK, when I trend the data, it's going to automatically calculate this field as part of the worker trending process. So why that's helpful is if you have big beefy fields, you have big beefy calculations, by doing it as part of the calculation in the background, you're going to have faster reports, you're going to have faster data returning. So it's going to be a huge value add towards enhancing the reports. But that said, you only have the ability to add 5 fields for each one of these field types. So for worker, I could have 5 single instance fields, 5 numeric fields, 5 Boolean fields. So I don't want to say you're limited because I have yet to see people run into that as a limitation, but you do need to be aware and you do need to consider about what you're calculating as part of trending. So to bring it back to that question that was asked around custom objects, yes, you can bring it in and you would do so through this field. Did that answer the question that was asked?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and just get out of that really quickly. All right. And then the next thing.
Hi, I have a question on the include terminations on period end date.
Okay.
When I enable that, I'm getting an alert that's telling me that it can result in inconsistent data and I need to purge worker trending data and create new trending data.
Excuse me. So let me ask you one more question before you answer that. When you go to the status screen, do you see anything down here under recent run history, or is this field blank down here?
I see trended worker update and trended worker fix.
Perfect. So what that means is that you are already trending data, and if you make a configuration change, well, as of the retroactive period going forward, you're going to have the new logic for termination, whereas data for like maybe 10 periods ago is using the old logic because Workday doesn't recalculate the old logic. So when Workday has an alert saying you might need to purge and you might need to recreate, all it's saying is that you might need to run a task called purge worker trended data. Purge worker trending data. And that'll essentially wipe out the data source and then recalculate it using that new logic historically.
Okay,
So-
so I won't lose anything. It will recalc going back.
Yeah, it'll recalculate 3. You won't wipe out any data or anything like that. You're essentially just saying, hey, all the stuff you calculated, just erase it. I'm going to recalculate it for you right now using the correct logic.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Harvey, I have a question.
Shoot.
And it is under the additional fields section, and it is actually the second table that is down there. Real quick, if I throw a field on here, is that stating that it is only indexed when it is used in a trended worker report, or is it going to be indexed across the system?
So the top is what is going to index it within the trended worker. The bottom is just if you want to pull in fields that are not natively on the trended worker object, but they are indexed in Workday, if you want to pull them into trending. So by doing something here, you're not going to make it available outside of trending. It's just outside of trending is what is already delivered by Workday, and we cannot adjust that right now.
Interesting. Very cool. Thanks, sir.
Yeah, you know what? It's something where this is a newer field. That's how I understand it. That's how I've used it. So there might be there might be a little bit of a, I'm trying to think what I want to say. It might be enhanced a little bit beyond my knowledge. So Kyla can kind of just take that away. And if it's any different, she'll chime in and let us know via the chat. All right. So
I have a question.
shoot. Yes, ma'am.
Does enabling trended worker or adding more fields or organizations to it affect the performance of the reports or anything? Like, does it have a performance impact?
That's a phenomenal question. I mean, all the questions are great. Don't get me wrong, but that's a great question because it allows me to talk about that a little bit more without just talking to you. Short answer is not in a noticeable way. When you're generating the data, if you have an organization or if you have a calculated field, it might slow down the initial generation by a couple minutes, but it's essentially generating the data to cache it. So by generating the data, by populating it inside of the trended worker object, you're removing that time it takes to calculate it because it's already been generated as part of a background process. So I think the shortest way of saying it is it does not impact the performance because you're generating the data via a background process. If you did not put the field on here and you access a field that does not natively exist on trended worker, then yes, your dashboards could slow down. So we want you, where possible, to put the fields that you are putting on reports, we want you to put them on the trended worker data source to eliminate that as a concern. Did that answer it or did I talk in a circle?
No, that's great to know. Thank you.
No problem.
Harvey, a couple of questions. This is Prakash. Sorry, I'm going to ask a question a little later. My apologies.
You sure? You're welcome to ask it now. I mean, I think two people tried to talk at once, so excuse me there.
No, myself and my wife, we are sitting in the same area, and she's on another call, so she essentially asked me to step away from the room. Okay.
Absolutely.
So 2 questions. I'm ready now. So if we add, let's say I add a couple of fields in the source field section, in the section that you're showing just now, which has fourth item being added. And later on, we determine that one of the fields is not necessary. Instead, I want to add another field. I would expect that's possible. It's just that I would have to regenerate all historical trended workers data. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. And I believe someone kind of asked the question earlier, but let's say you generate data. Well, what do you need to do if you ever need to get rid of it for whatever reason or make a change like that? So there's a task that you can run called purge worker trending data. And when you select that and you click confirm, what it's going to do is it's going to say everything that it calculated and it put on the trended worker object, delete it.
Mhm.
And then you would make the adjustment within maintain trended workers. It actually tells you that you purged it, and it takes 0 seconds. But you would make the update. Now you would go in, you would remove the field, and then you would click OK, and then you would regenerate the data. So if you ever have to do that, it's about it takes about a minute to purge data normally, and the calculation of data depends on your organization. I would say an average is about 1 to 2 hours. I've seen it take upwards of 3 hours before to generate data. So you're just going to have to realize that if you ever purge data, you have to recalculate it. Data is calculated, but the reports, like data is being added to the reports as it calculates. So you're going to want to make sure that either people are not using the dashboard or it's not going to confuse people when data is missing from the reports. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
It does. Interestingly, if you notice the bottom table, right besides each of the source fields, there is no delete icon there. So I would I'm kind of thinking that it allowed me to delete that line item.
I don't know why those fields are not able to be removed. I think it's something I want to look into in a little bit later. But I think I would kind of return that by challenging that, saying, does it matter for these fields down here, or is it more critical for the ones where we're limited up top?
Okay, so there's no limit on the bottom field. That's interesting.
And there's a little piece of help text here. It's kind of hard to read, but my eyes just caught it. I might be referencing these on reports in the system. And there you go, field usage 10.
Right, yeah. Interesting.
Now, if these are standard reports, it might be a little bit more complicated, but these are custom reports, so I could remove it.
Yeah. And the other question I had is this called semi-additive measure or something like that. I cannot read it properly, but okay. All right, thank you. I will read that.
Yeah, absolutely. So semi-additive measure, just because it's hard to see, it is a measure that does not get summed over multiple periods. So for example, headcount's a semi-additive measure because headcount for Q1 is not equal to the sum of headcount in January, February, and March. Instead, headcount is equal to the headcount of March. So it's like a end of period type field. I am transparently not very familiar with this, so I'd have to research it before talking about it intelligently. Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have 2 more tasks to do. Super simple. One of them is actually generating of data, and then we'll take a break. So let me just jump ahead for a second and talk about the configuration of security. Now, I'm not sure how many people know. There is a really cool report or really cool task called security, view security for secureable item. And what it allows you to do is to look up tasks, to look up objects and find out what the security behind them is. Well, one thing that we're going to need to look up, or one thing that you're going to eventually need to do, is go to the domain for trended worker data. And why that's important is if we generate data, of course I can't do it correctly. Trend work. Let's see what I'm messing up. If we generate data, it's like that's cool, but we need to give people access to that data. We need to give people access to be able to see the data and then share the report with them. So I'm having trouble seeing this as well. Okay. I don't know. I'm making a small mistake here. I'm not really sure what it is, so you'll have to forgive me. But I know that the domain is called trended worker data. So however you access it, I commonly will just search for domain : trended worker data. I'm very much a manual type person. However you access it, if you're going to need to provide security at some point to be able to allow people to see this data. So if you select the related action off the domain, and you go to domain and edit security policy permission, you can set the security for who views this information. Now, I won't go too detail on what all this configuration is on the screen because we could probably spend the entire time talking about security. But if you want to provide access to the data and you don't want to provide it to the general mass, you can just do yourself. You know, you could just do whatever security group you represent in here. And then when you're ready for people to see the data, when you're ready for people to see the reports, then you can expand this out and actually add them. People like the CHRO, HR partners, managers, whoever needs to view the data, this is how they get access to the backend data to be able to run reports and whatnot. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you are on here at the least, and if not you, you are on here at the least, if not your larger population. If you ever need to come back later and add your larger population, that's fine. We can keep going with our configuration for today. Once you add the appropriate security groups, you're going to want to click OK. And then you're always, anytime you make security changes, you want to make sure that you run the appropriate task of activate pending security policy changes, just so you can make that change official and effective. All right. So we've done a lot of stuff, and I think that at this point, everyone should have the majority of their maintain trended worker configuration stuff done. If everything is done and everything looks good for you under the configuration tab and the organization tab, then we're actually good to go ahead and start generating the trended data. So that is the last step. So we're going to run a task called create worker trending data. And when you run this task, it's going to tell you all the configuration that you have established thus far. My start date is at least 3 years in the past. I'm using the calendar-based configuration of year month. I don't have a fiscal schedule. If I had a fiscal schedule, it would appear here. I have my termination box set to yes. I have my international assignment box set to no. And then all you need to do is click the confirm button and click OK. And once you do that, it'll tell you create worker trending job has been submitted. And then if you were to go back into the maintain trended workers page, and I'll give it a second just for folks to kind of catch up, you can see the jobs running and you can see the different trended worker type transactions. So right now, for me, it's generating snapshot data for February 2021, and it's generating activity data for February 2021, and it's processing. I can see that my data for January, February, March, my data for April has completed. My data for the current month has completed. So what it does is it starts with today's data, and you can't see my hands up in the air doing all kinds of wavy motions. It's generating today's data, and then it's going back in a descending order. So after February is done, it's going to go to January. January is already done. December's done. November's done. So it goes backwards in time. And that's kind of cool because if we're generating this in the middle of the day, it's going to go backwards and you're going to see data start populating historically on graphs and things like that. All right. So we'll keep an eye on this. This is running in the background, and I don't want to say it's like the Ron Popeil, you set it and forget it thing, but that's kind of what it is right now. So we're just going to kind of forget about that. We'll talk about two or three more slides, and then we'll take a break if that works for everyone. All right. So what we were doing, or what we just did, was we told Workday to submit the job and calculate the trending data, and it's going to calculate the previous 36 periods of data. So we submitted the big job, if you will. And then what's going to happen afterwards is every day moving forward at a certain time, and I don't know the time off the top of my head, but at a certain time every day, Workday is going to automatically create a new trickle process to process those historical changes. It's going to do it for today, this period. It's going to do it for 1 period ago, 2 periods ago, and 3 periods ago. So it's going to automatically look for changes and recalculate that once a day. If you perform any changes, like say 4 periods ago, you might need to recreate the trending data or possibly consider a purge and then rerunning the previous generation step. But I think as y'all saw, running the process was like 2 seconds. Purging was like 2 seconds as well. It's just about generating and how long that time takes. So it's pretty easy. I don't want folks to be scared about this. And then we looked at this inside of Workday, but I love running maintain trended workers to see the status. And you can see how long jobs took, when it started, when it ran, you know, if it was a trickle, it's an update, how many things were processed, etc. So it's actually really cool. It tells you how many times or how many records were processed. So you can kind of see as you hire people, you can see this number go up and see if they're getting picked up as well. So there's another, excuse me, there's another thing that we've said a couple times. We've said the word purge. And it used to be that you couldn't recreate trending data. It used to be that you always had to purge. So my mindset's very much always purge and regenerate. But there's been some enhancements recently. There might be some times that you need to resubmit training data. And there might be times when you actually need to purge. We have them laid out on the screen. If you have a retroactive activity from say 12 periods ago that you need to get picked up in the data, you can resubmit the create trending job. You've added new fields, like you've added a calc field to the trended data source, you added a custom organization, you can just run a create process and not impact your data or your reports. It's simply going to update the data when it generates. But there might be times that you need to run a purge. The example that was given earlier was, what if we enable that termination field? Well, you're going to have a point in time historically where that termination field might have been unchecked, and then 3 periods ago moving forward, it's checked. So in that kind of an instance where you have to change the core configuration, or you're changing or adding an ethnicity or something like that, it usually is a little bit easier to purge the data and then regenerate it. Now, as you are generating the process now, you're going to get a good baseline for how long it takes you to create it. So that said, we started the process at what is 12:30 Mountain Time, or about 4 or 5 minutes ago. You're going to get a good idea if you ever ran this again, how long it'll take for all the data to be recalculated. And then let's talk through one more slide really quickly before we take that break, because I don't know about you, but I definitely need it. What exactly do we mean by current period? And in short, when we're talking about the current period, that's the period that we're currently in, and it's also one period forward. So you are able to pick up future dated staffing events in the data. You are able to pick up future dated worker changes in the data as well. And it's helpful for you to be able to see data as of the end of this period today. So we're still generating data, and it's not until you really get your hands on your own data that this really might make sense. But the trickle allows you to pick up some future data transactions as well, even if the month or the period is not done yet. You do have to update reports to reflect that, but when we actually go into the reports, we'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail. So that said, Mike, unless you have anything, I'd like to just open it up for questions really quickly, and then we can take a break and come back to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do that, and then we'll set the break, and then we'll go. Sounds good.
Hi, I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
So can you go back to the slide about, or can you explain again about, I guess, like purge and create versus just creating the data again and what you would do those for?
Absolutely. Okay, so do you want me to just go over everything, or is there a specific question that might be able to answer it for you to help out?
Specifically purge and create.
Okay, so the purge and create process, purging is essentially going to wipe the data source clean, and then rerunning the process is going to repopulate it. Now, you would want to purge the data if you think that there's going to be an inconsistency historically with the data. So if we change our logic on how we treat terminations, if we add maybe new termination reasons, or if we add a new gender to the system and folks are selecting it, you might want to purge the data because 4 or 5 periods ago, those changes are not going to be reflected in your data. So if you're ever worried about data inconsistencies, purging is commonly a good practice, and then regenerating it based upon the configuration at generation time.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah, I never know if I explain things well enough. So if if I'm just not doing a good job, by all means, please let me know. All right. Any more questions before I myself just take a break real quickly? So Mike, how long is our break?
Usually 10 to 15 minutes.
All right, so we will meet back here at about 12:48 Mountain Time. I guess do that to your own time zone. Thanks, y'all. All right, we have about 1 more minute or so before we get back going and started.
We're doing really well on time, Harvey. Great questions, great interaction. You know, this is definitely what we're looking for. Great group here.
Yeah, this group is awesome. Yeah, as we're getting back to it, and we're going to get started here in a second, as we're getting back to it, I'd say if people have any suggestions or if people want, I don't want to say, you know, if there's anything that people want to see a little bit differently with how we're presenting, by all means, please chime in. Please let us know, because we can tailor things as we go on the fly. So I appreciate y'all. We'll give another 30 seconds or so before we get going. All right, thanks y'all for giving me another minute or two to grab some more food and something to drink. All right, so right before we left, we submitted the job for trended worker, for trended workers, and there's something that I just want to show you, kind of reinforce before we get on to the next steps of actually working with the dashboard, and that's how you can check the progress of the data that's generating in the system. So there's two things, or there's two ways to do it. First of which is running the worker trending audit report, which is cool, and it's something that I'll show you what is included in it. And the second is something that we've done a couple times, and that's maintain trended workers and reviewing the status tab. So that said, this is what the maintain trended workers page looks like. And if you want to click refresh on it, you can, but it'll tell you all the jobs that are running, and it'll also tell you what period it's currently processing. I clicked refresh too quickly, but once it is completed, you'll see something very similar to this. You'll see trended worker, the create job, which is triggered by me, is in a completed status. And then it also did a couple more custom calculations. And it also shows you the history. I can see the purges that I ran today. I could see a trickle update that was ran yesterday, and I could see a fix that was ran previously. So it's kind of cool, but more importantly is keep an eye on this page. If yours has not finished yet, or if it has finished, keep an eye on it so you can see how long the job took. That way, when you do this in production, you can understand about how long it's going to take should you ever need to purge or if you ever need to recreate it. Now, the other version, or the other way to do this, is running the worker trending audit report. And on this report, it is a matrix report that has a graph component to it, so you can click on it and interact with the data and go through all the drillable fields, all the detailed fields, which is super cool. But I'm going to just look at 2018-03, and I'm going to look at the activity. So if I wanted to click on this data, if I wanted to see what was included in this trending data, this report allows me to do so. And I can see that the 2 activity transactions were, forgive me, I'm not gonna mess up these names, but I can see that these 2 individuals had an effective date of 3/18 activity. They were hired into this organization as employees with this job profile in this location. So it's kind of cool, because if you ever want to see where someone is in the data or see what makes up the data, this is an easy way to do it. And then I only have 465 people in my tenant. So from a snapshot perspective, I mean, this is easy. If you have 20, 30,000, it's not going to be as good of a time. So you might have to look into some alternatives there, but it's a great way to see the data that is included. All right, so go back in real quickly, and we're going to start the next stage of the process, and that's going to be around enabling the diversity dashboard. But before we do that, there's one task that I just need everyone to run, and the reason is when we were on the dashboard earlier, you saw tabs. We had one for hires, leadership, summary, etc. And believe it or not, that was not something in Workday version 1. That is a newer piece of functionality. And there's a task that we have to run to enable it. So when we're going through all these steps in our implementation or sandbox environment, you're also going to need to run them in your production environment. This isn't going to break anything. Obviously, you want to test and do full regression testing, but we're just telling Workday, hey, allow us to use dashboard on tabs, pretty please. So you're going to run this task. And I'm just going to go up, I'll run it, and I'll show you what it looks like. Bulk enable tabs. You go ahead and run the task. You click on it, and if you click confirm and you click OK, you'll now be able to use tabs when you're on the dashboards page. You'll be able to set things up with tabs, and it's really simple. You just click confirm and you're done, and there's no other action to do. And now you can use tabs wherever. So kind of fun. All right. So that said, let's go back into talking mode for a second and just talk about what we're going to do when we enable the diversity dashboard. Now, if you revisit what we talked about an hour and a half ago, and it seems like forever ago, we got through the initial downloading process. We got through the process of generating trended data. And now all we have to do is turn the dashboard on and associate reports with the dashboard. So we're kind of halfway through, but we're also kind of on the home stretch here. And these are the steps that we're going to do. They're documented slide by slide, but very similar to the past. We'll go through and we'll take care of things here. So we're going to first start off by configuring security for the delivered diversity dashboard. This time, that task, security for securable item, will actually work because I practiced it. So we'll go through that task. We'll enable some domain security policies as needed. We'll add security, we'll activate our changes, and we'll be out of this before you know it. So the first thing to do is we need to find the security policy for the diversity dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead in the system and I'm going to go ahead and run this task. Security securable item. And the report, or I should say the dashboard, is called diversity. So you can probably just type in anything that has that prefix, but I'm typing the whole word. And when I type it in, I get 2 espresso reports that return. I can't explain the logic on why, but either one that you select will bring you to the same object. So just go ahead and select one of them and click on View Security. Now, what you're doing here is you're saying, show me all the security associated with that word diversity. It's returning this as a report. And when I click View Security, it's going to tell me exactly what security policy is needed to be exactly what security policy needs to be updated to influence it. It's also going to tell me what security groups are currently active. So the security policy we need to update is management dashboard diversity. And if these permitted security groups are not, like if they're not correct, if they're correct, you don't have to do anything. But if you need to add anyone in the future, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to come in here, click on the related action, go to domain security policy and click edit permission. And you're going to be able to assign them view or modify capabilities. But how do you know if it's view or modify? Well, when you run security for securable item, it actually tells you what the permission required is. So I know that I need to grant view permission to be able to run this dashboard. So I'm going to come in here, this security policy, edit permission. I'm going to come in here. I can also view on the secureable actions as well to see what I need access to see it. So there's a couple ways you can do this. But this is something that I would recommend, again, you set up for yourself right now. And then if you need to set it up for other people in the future, you can. If you're doing this in production and you're YOLOing it, you're only doing it once, then great. Maybe just do it for yourself. If you're doing it in the sandbox environment and you want to be able to test people, not go through it again, you can add them in here. Just don't share it with people as the setup process is going on. Anyways, add rows, add security groups, add view access as necessary. And then once you're done there, you're going to click OK. And then you are going to go ahead and want to run the activate security. You want to run the activate pending security policy changes task again to now put your security into effect. So you fill in an appropriate comment, and then you'll click OK. All right, and that is that. So I'm going to give you a second to do that, just to go ahead and finish adding your permissions and activate security. And while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up the presentation and go to the next logical item, and that's around configuring the Vibe dashboard. I have a couple slides that I already kind of went through, just so you can see it detailed out if you ever get a copy of the deck. All right, so let's actually configure the Vibe dashboard now. Now it's getting exciting. I mean, I got excited about trended worker, but I think this is where people start getting excited because they can finally start seeing and playing with the data. And kind of keeping with that trend here, just revisiting an old slide, now we have to configure the Vibe dashboard. You know, these are the steps that we're going to take towards building the dashboard. Now we're going to focus the time here on transforming the existing diversity dashboard. When I go in, I'll show you how to do it from a custom dashboard if that is more of your jam because you're already using the diversity dashboard. But we're going to just do this with the assumption that you're using the diversity dashboard. We're going to be adding tabs to the dashboard. We're going to be copying announcements to the dashboard, and we're going to really just be following a lot of stuff that's in the guide and allow you to visualize it with me driving. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to edit the existing dashboard. And the task to do that is called maintain dashboards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Workday, and I'm going to run the task maintain dashboards. And I'm going to get some errors at the top, and I'm just going to gently ignore them for now. You never ignore errors, but I'm going to ignore them for now because I know that some other people are probably messing with the system. Since I'm stalling for a second, is there anyone that does not have access to maintain dashboards? Because this is a critical component going forward. I just want to double check that everyone that has access, that's following along, has access. Okay. All right, so I'm in maintain dashboards, and you can filter on diversity. I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down until I get to diversity, and I can see diversity here. I'm going to bring it up to the top. I can see that diversity is the dashboard name. It is Workday delivered. It allows tabs. Yay, we enabled it. And then I can do a couple things from here. I can run or I could edit it. If you were already using the diversity dashboard, at this time, you could create a new custom dashboard, name it something else like diversity vibe or something along those lines. And then the next changes are actually going to be on the report for you. You can still follow along with what we're doing on the diversity dashboard. But for the most of us, we're going to use the diversity dashboard, and we're going to go ahead and click edit. When I click edit, I'm in the main configuration screen. There's a couple of things here. It automatically puts me on the content section, but I'm going to go back to settings. So under settings, it gives me some things such as the name of the dashboard. It tells me the domain for the dashboard. So if I knew to come here instead of doing security for securable item, I could have found the domain associated with the dashboard in here. So it's just another shortcut to get there. And it's also going to tell me some other key information. Now, if you brought the configuration packages down from Workday, this should have automatically filled in for you. And if not, you can typically select edit description and add it, but there shouldn't be any configuration here. Now, the first thing to do is you're going to add the tabs to this dashboard. Now, my tabs are already here, but if you don't have any tabs, you're going to click the add button. You're going to type in the tab name, and we have the 5 names on the screen: summary, hires, promotions, leadership, and attrition. You're going to add the tab name. And then that's going to be, let's see, I can't add my probes up. That's kind of weird. You're going to add the tab name, and then I had to uncheck the configurable by user box here. but we're also going to want to add the prompt set as well. And there's a delivered prompt set here called workforce composition. And this workforce composition prompt set has a number of fields here. So I'm just gonna pause here, and I'm gonna let folks add a tab and add the prompt set of workforce composition before I talk further about that.
What if the prompt set is empty?
So are you able to click on the prompt set and see anything?
No, it's grayed out. Is that my security issues?
It could be. Is configurable by user checked?
Yes.
Uncheck that, and then the prompt set hopefully
Oh, there.
will be selectable.
Okay, thank you.
It's funny, I just had that problem when I was talking, and I kind of in my head I was like, oh no, what's going on? So all right, so what
Maybe a
prompt sets
quick question.
Oh, go ahead.
Does anybody know why Workday this allows changing the prompt set once it is set on that dashboard? It seems like we have to really delete the dashboard tab and recreate it in order to change the prompt set. Or like, for example, there are scenarios where you start off with a prompt set supervisory organization and include supervisory organization, right? And then you say, well, I need from and to times dates also. And then you say, well, I need management level, another parameter to the dashboard. So naturally you want to go back into the prompt set and add more. It doesn't allow that either. Neither does it allow to set a new prompt set. Does anybody know why could that be? Or maybe Harvey, you.
I wish I had an answer for you. I truly don't know. So does anyone on the phone maybe have an answer to that question around the customization of prompt sets and the configurability by users? So at the risk of sounding like someone who doesn't know, because I truthfully don't, I think probably the best idea is to post that community, and there might be someone that knows, but at the worst case, we'll probably get an answer from Workday on why that is, and maybe promote some positive change in the form of a brainstorm.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, not at all, not at all, thank you.
It took 2 hours, but y'all stumped me, so I appreciate that. Just real quickly, for folks that might not know what a prompt set is, a prompt set allows you to default information in to a dashboard, things like the scope of the organization, whether or not you include subordinate organizations, time series, start and end dates, fields that are normally on a report. It allows you to default things in so you don't have to do this for every single report. And so the report can be tailored to the person that's running it on the screen. All right, so I'm gonna go down and I'll say if you add too many dashboards, there's a little delete button. You can delete it. But once you have your 5 dashboards and the 5 prompt sets here, you should see something very similar to this. And you might have to change these fields a little bit. You might have to change the organization to be the top level organization for you, whether or not you include subordinates, as well as things like time series, start dates, and end dates. So I'll leave this up on the screen for a second and just allow folks to get at least one of these dashboards and one of these worklets correct. And I guess because I can talk while people are doing this, the time series start date, that's normally the earliest possible date for some data in the report. Granted, data should only go back 36 periods. I usually set this to be something about 36 periods in the past, or maybe you use a field like determined default value at runtime of 3 years ago or 36 months ago. This might be something that you set up and then you play with based upon what the dashboard looks like. So just know that you can come back in here and you can positively influence these at a later date if you need to, and update the dashboard dynamically. Right. So we're going to want to do this for summary, hires, promotions, leadership, and attrition. If you haven't done this for things like hires, promotion, and leadership, that's fine. As long as we get one done, that's the important thing for now, because we're going to come back here in a second and have some time for y'all to focus on this a little bit more. I'm going to go to the announcement section next. And this is something that in full transparency can probably be skipped if it's not something that you're interested in setting up right now. But I still encourage people just to know what it does. So I'm going to go back into my diversity dashboard here and just kind of show you along the top. So right across the top, there's a couple announcements. The message by Workday, belonging to diversity with a video, and this other one, and you can actually scroll through them. Well, these are configured on the dashboard screen under the announcement section. And I have the ones from the tenant here. I don't have images associated with it, but I have the ones from the tenant, from the configuration guide here. And if you want to edit them, or if you want to add them, you can click on the edit button. And then within here, you have the ability to add rows, reorder them, etc. I would say at the least, if nothing else, just add one announcement with a message title and a message, just so you can put on the dashboard and see what it looks like. And then as time goes on, as you want to influence this based upon some of the standard configuration, you have the ability to do so. So I'll just leave mine on the screen so you can see it for a second before I go off into the next task. All right, and once you have an announcement in there, you know, whatever it is, hopefully it's the title and a message, you go ahead and just click OK. And we'll have our announcement in there. Now, the next step is a little bit tricky. And the reason I kind of mentioned it's tricky is by default, these reports do not always come down from Customer Central, either shared or eligible for dashboards. So if you go to edit dashboard, if you're in the dashboard edit screen, and again, I'm just in maintain dashboards and I clicked on edit, and you go to the content section and you click on one of the tabs. If you expand worklets, I feel like I'm giving instructions to perform surgery here. If you expand on worklets, you can add rows. And when you add a row, the worklet is going to be the reports that are eligible for this dashboard. Now, you might not see anything here. And if you don't see anything here, it's because that report is either not eligible for the dashboard or it's not shared. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how we update it. And then I will throw a list of reports on the screen so you can update it in the background. So I have a full list of reports here that I'll share with you. So what I would recommend is if you don't have anything here, let's just go through one. So go ahead and search the system for for employee movement versus headcount by gender. All right. So I am just going to search the system for my report definition. So RD:space and then the report name. And you should see the report return if you pulled everything down. And of course, I have two different objects, one of which is the report and one's the report definition. I'm going to go into the report definition, and I'm going to go into it via edit mode. So related action, custom report, and edit. Now there's two things that we need to do and we need to be concerned with in here in order to make the dashboard, in order to make the report appear on the dashboard. First of which is we have to go to the Output tab. And under Output, we go to Worklet Options. If you notice on the other page, we have to specify the worklet. So we're going to go to Worklet Options. The name's kind of the same. And we have to say, enable it as a worklet, and then make it available on the diversity dashboard. You can make these available on whatever dashboard you want, So if you aren't using the diversity dashboard, if you're using a custom dashboard because you're already using diversity for something else, this is where you would select your custom dashboard. But you have to say, be available on the dashboard, and then be available on this specific dashboard. Once that is done, you're not done yet. You're going to want to go to the Share tab because you need to actually make the report shared with others. Pulling them down from Customer Central does not share them by default. So you're going to want to come in here and you're either going to want to share it with all authorized users or share it with specific authorized groups and users. Now, the question is going to come up, what is all authorized users? Well, the short of it is anyone that you allowed to view the trended worker data source on that domain that we updated about an hour ago would fall under share with all authorized users. So that's a pretty safe bet for now. But if you ever need to trim it down, possibly remove a population from being able to see a certain report, then that's when you would get into the specifics. So again, make sure it's enabled as a worklet, it's available on the dashboard, and then make sure it's also shared with the specific groups of people. And then once that is done, you can come in here and you should be able to see it as a worklet now. And then when you select it, everything will populate in, including the required for groups, the size, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and give folks a second just to do that for these reports. And, if you can get through all of them, great. If not, just as long as you can kind of get through a couple and see it, that's really the focus here, is just getting that stuff enabled. So if y'all don't mind, if someone could just confirm, are there people that need to share these reports and enable them on the dashboard? Or are these reports already shared with the dashboard? Because I want to give folks time if they need a minute or two to enable them. So if someone could just confirm whether
they were already shared for me, Harvey. I didn't have to edit the report definition.
Perfect. All right. Well, it seems like folks might not need a moment, so thank you for that confirmation there. I'm really glad to see that that is working as expected. And if for whatever reason you need to share them, I'm kind of just buying you a minute here. Just share at least one report. We can keep going, and then we can come back later and update those reports. Okay. So next up is mapping the prompts. And I'm going to get y'all out of PowerPoint. I'm going to go back in here. But when you add these reports, sometimes you might need to click down and come back into edit mode. But when you go down here and you populate the worklets, you can see that there's prompts as well. Now, prompts are able to be configured on a dashboard level, which we have up here. But if you ever need to update them specifically for a report, you don't do it up here. Instead, next to each worklet, there's a map prompts field. And then you can click on that and actually influence prompts specifically for this report. Now, why is that important? Well, there are some reports in the system that use ethnicity or race. And it's kind of funny, when I was implementing Workday for the first time, I guess it's not really funny, but it's one of those things where I didn't realize how ethnicity is not necessarily an international term. Very few countries actually track it. So you might want to specify certain locations for ethnicity, especially if there's another country that's not tracking ethnicity, or maybe they do and they don't want to publish it for whatever reason. So if you ever need to update and hard code a prompt value, you have the ability to do so through the map prompts function. And again, usually something for like location country being the United States of America makes sense. Now, there's a normal question that kind of comes up here, and that's what happens if I want a Vibe dashboard for the United States? And I also want a Vibe dashboard for India. I can't think of a country name, excuse me. In that instance, we would commonly recommend setting up separate reports and even separate dashboards. That way you have a tailored experience to the country. So we're setting up a dashboard here very focused on the United States, But if you ever wanted to set up a second dashboard or have a second set of reports for a different country or region, you're absolutely able to. And, you know, maybe if we're setting up a dashboard for Germany where ethnicity is not a tracked term there, then we might not want to put those reports, those ethnicity-based reports on the dashboard because it's useless real estate. So just think about that. Think about the future of what you want to do there. All right. And then the last thing I just want to put on here is something else that's not really used. And I'm going to go back to my example real quickly of the dashboard. You know, I tried to get cute and I tried to find the dashboard through search, and I should have just went to the normal method. I'm going to pull up my dashboard and I just want to explain to folks what menus are. When it comes to dashboards, there's very limited real estate. You can only put 6 reports on a dashboard. Well, what happens when you want to put something else on here, or you want to link people out to other reports, to maybe external surveys or other dashboards? We have a really cool piece of functionality called menus on what is the right-hand side here. And something that you can do is you can configure menus for dashboards. So I am trying to go back, and in the dashboard configuration screen, under each tab, if you scroll down to the bottom, you have a menu section. And the menu section allows you to put specific labels in, as well as specific custom reports. So, you know, maybe you include a link to your organization's D&I page, or maybe some statistics or something like that. I'm not really sure. But if you ever want to do a link outside the dashboard, the menu is a great way to do it with very limited real estate on a page. So I'd encourage everyone, if possible, just to set up 1 or 2 reports or tasks or things like that, so you can become familiar with it and start thinking and remembering it. All right, and now there is one more thing to do, and that's simply adding the dashboard to the home page. So I'm going to go ahead and click done here. I am done with this dashboard and it should be good to go. But one of the things is I need to make it accessible to my users, or to at least myself. I'm going to go back into maintain dashboards here. And I am going to scroll down to the home dashboard. And under the home dashboard, I'm going to click edit. And I am going to expand out the worklets. Now, what the home dashboard is when you log into Workday and you see your dashboards initially, if you're not using a new UI or not using PEX or something like that, people experience, this is how you can control which worklets appear and in what order they appear. So you might want to add diversity here if it's not already there. And when you add diversity there, it'll auto-populate the required 4 groups. You can say whether or not it's required, whether or not a user can remove it from the page if they have the access to do so, and reorder it. So you're going to want to add the diversity worklet if it's not already there, at least from a test environment. All right, and then when we click done, if all goes well, and I'm extremely nervous at this point, if all goes well, and you click on home, and you have your dashboard here, which I do not for some reason, so you'll have to excuse me. But if you have it here, you should be able to select the diversity dashboard. I'm going to go a slightly different way, and I'm going to click on my dashboards. I'm going to click diversity from there. Something else you could do is you could also go to maintain dashboards if you don't want to add it to the home page. And under maintain dashboards, you could scroll down to your diversity dashboard, and then you could click the run button as well to run it dynamically. And then when you run it, again, this is the most nerve-wracking part. You should see an announcement if you created it. You should see the tabs across the top as well as any reports that you've added to it. You should see data in those reports. And then you should also see the menu on the right-hand side or somewhere if you configured it. So let me just pause here for a second. Is there anyone who has reports returned and the reports have data? Is there anyone with success at this point?
Yes, it's awesome.
Woohoo!
This is the farthest I've ever gotten with this. This workshop is awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm glad. Perfect. Let me ask a question a different way as well. Is there anyone who maybe doesn't see data on here or maybe doesn't see the reports? Because if so, when we break, we still have a couple more things to do, but when we break, we can stay on and we can troubleshoot some of those things individually, okay? So if you don't have success at this point, don't fret. We can do a little bit more personalized attention after this workshop is done. All right.
I'm having trouble viewing the diversity dashboard, but I think it has to do with my security.
Okay, well, the next thing that we're going to be doing is benchmarking, and benchmarking is kind of a hands-off type thing. So we have a little survey to do here in a second. We might have a little break. Do you mind maybe waiting about 30, 45 minutes and we'll do personal attention there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Thank you.
I also had some issues migrating the data. In general, I think it was the customer data that you had requested in the beginning. We kept getting an error message, and I don't know if there was any way that you could assist with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll take a look at it. So, Mike, I know that you had a survey that you wanted to go through. Do you want to do that and do the break and then do benchmarking? How do you want to handle the next couple minutes?
Yeah, we can do the survey right before the benchmarking. That's probably the best way to do it. I'm trying to get that set up right now. Just give me a second. We could probably just field a couple of questions, and I'll post it in the chat and give it like 5 minutes, like 5 minutes to do the survey and then 5 minutes for a break. Then we can roll into the benchmarking. Let me just dig up the link real quick.
Absolutely. So let's do that. I know there might have been 1 or 2 questions in the chat. So if anyone has questions, by all means, raise them. So it looks like we have a question. Worklet would be a custom report all the time in dashboard. So when we're configuring, and I've got community up in the background, excuse me, I'm lost now. RD employee movement versus headcount.
Survey's posted in the chat, but when we're done here with the questions, we can go right to that and fill it out. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So question came up, can we use anything else other than custom reports in worklets? And the short answer is yes and no. You can, worklets by default are custom reports and graphs and things like that. And if you need to link to something else, whether it's a task, an external link, the menu is a great option for that. So let me scroll down to the diversity dashboard here. The menu is a great option for externally linking to things. If for some reason that you can't do something in here, let's say you want to do a video, announcements are a great way to get videos out there. You could also create a custom report with quick links to a video, and we're getting kind of advanced here, but there's always a number of ways to get things done, but worklets are strictly for custom reports. Okay. So Mike posted a survey in the chat. If y'all don't mind just kind of taking it, and then we'll give it about another 5-minute break or so, and we'll come back here at what is effectively 1:32, 1:33 Mountain Time, and then we'll finish out about 30 minutes on benchmarking and then do personalized support. So take the survey if y'all don't mind. Thanks.
Hey Harvey,
Yeah.
Can I ask you a quick question? How does this work with Prism? Just a thought, because we are exploring to see if we can start using Prism. So just want to see how that would work.
Yeah, absolutely. And Prism's going to allow you to do some additional calculations and allow you to do some additional things like benchmarking. I would look to you, Mike, to see if you have a better answer around how it relates to Prism, because my knowledge, unfortunately, is a little bit too technical at that point, and I don't want to lose any audience here.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say here with Prism Analytics, that's kind of where we're looking at the Vibe Index.
Okay.
Leveraging that. However, safe harbor, right? There's still discussion about how that's going to work. That might be the logical conclusion. So if you have that, then of course, Vibe Index is sold separately.
Okay.
And just to know that. But excuse me. Yeah, that if you have a specific question about Prism, let me know. I can hook you up with Jacob Abrams and get you any question, anything imaginable you could possibly want answered.
Yeah, we just started looking at Prism to see how whether we want to like bring it into our Workday ecosystem or not. So we are just trying to figure that out. So I was just wondering how that would work with Vibe and everything. So
Yeah, it's definitely coming together. It's a component. Good questions to ask though to the sales team and folks that you're talking to right now. If you're interested in me putting you in contact with somebody, let me know. But I would definitely direct those questions to your customer success manager,
okay.
And they will definitely point you in the right direction.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Harvey.
All right, so we're just on a break for the next probably 5 minutes or so. So 1:33 Mountain Time. Thanks, y'all.
I'll just say, as you take that break and fill out the survey, please don't hesitate to put some comments in there and questions. Feedback is very important. Thank you.
All right, about one more minute, we'll get started again. All right, so by this point, hopefully, I know there's a couple success stories and a couple people we're going to help out offline here in a couple minutes, but by this point, we have the majority of the setup done and you are seeing data. And we have a great recording, great video, so you want to share it with the family later this week, help the kids get to sleep. This is a great way to do it, give them something boring to watch. But I do want to shift our focus to benchmarking, because benchmarking is an awesome opportunity for you to leverage with respect to Workday in general, but especially when it comes to Vibe. And it's great because it's an offering that comes with the core license, and it's going to allow you to compare performance and data across specific metrics to industry peers. So it's a nice little value add that's part of the core subscription. And we'll go through some things with, specifically to Vibe, go through a little overview, do a little demo, show you how to look at data, and we'll show you what goes into an implementation. This is going to be a little hands-on, but at the same time, I'll be spending a little bit more time in PowerPoint because, there are agreements and things like that that typically need to be considered. So let's just start off talking about an overview of this. Now, why? Simply, I think it makes sense to be able to compare metrics with peers in the industry. Decisions are incredibly hard to make in a vacuum, and it's hard to get a good idea of performance when all you know is your data. And if you're an organization of 3,000 people, sometimes that data is very, very minimal. Even if you're an organization of 200,000-300,000, I mean, the data is a little bit more spread out, but you're only comparing it against yourself. So being able to understand anonymous data in the industry allows you to see how you stack up against it, which might influence how you change your approach to different practices, whether it's hiring, whether it's with respect to diversity and inclusion. And, I might have mentioned this before, but if not, I think it's something that's worth reiterating. Benchmarking is something that you have to opt into. Just because you have a Workday tenant does not automatically mean that you get benchmarking data and people are getting your data. No, it's nothing like that. You have to opt into benchmarking. And then the data, any data that does leave, is anonymous with respect to what people see, and it's aggregated on Workday's side. So while this is optional, it's something that's incredibly useful and it's incredibly hands-off. But the data is only as good as the number of folks and the participants who opt in. So I'd suggest, even if you don't think it's something your organization would go for, I would still suggest that everyone just takes a look and evaluates it and see if there is an opportunity or if there is an intersection with what your organization is trying to do and whether this can help you get there. So what is benchmarking? Put simply, it's the ability to measure yourself against performance, whether it's peers, whether it's even maybe yourself historically. And it helps tell a story, or it helps add data to that story you're trying to tell and give you those insights. And it helps in a couple of ways. So first, it's going to help you improve visibility on things like organization health. It's going to give you the data to answer a question of how am I doing compared to others like me? I mean, all the time I ask my employees, how are we positioning ourselves with respect to post-production services? And sometimes that's an easy question. Sometimes it's not. But being able to say whether you're on par with respect to the data in your system or if you're way off is kind of a game changer in terms of knowing how you need to evolve or some areas that you might be exceeding in. And with that information, you can make things like smarter decisions for the organization. You can prioritize, or you can make recommendations on where you should be focusing. But ultimately, having that benchmark, that's going to allow you to maintain or keep your competitive advantage. And we're here to talk about Vibe today, and we're here to relate it back to Vibe, but this is just something that's highly valuable to have insight in even outside of that Vibe. So again, I just encourage everyone to explore this. Now, before I don't say before Vibe, but over the past couple of years, the process has become a lot more effective or a lot more efficient, if you will. I think if we looked at doing this 5 years ago, it would just be like, no, it's kind of painful. You got to sign an agreement. You have to prepare your data. You have to submit your data. You have to wait for results from other people. You have to analyze your results, and you have to import it into Workday. It was kind of a painful process, but it led to an opportunity for improvement, which is kind of why we're talking about it today, because it is pretty efficient. Excuse me, there's some more stuff on the bottom. But Workday saw an opportunity for this improvement. And by opportunity, we're referring to Workday providing additional value on top of the benchmarking stuff that already exists in the system. There's an option to start performing data as a service. What we have is DaaS, data as a service, as a way to provide information to traditionally a closed tenant. All of our Workday environments are closed, and we really only have access to our data. We can't access another company's data. But by having Workday as the intermediary, taking this data and aggregating it, it allows us to have a closed environment with some outside influence to understand how we're performing. And that's really the key behind data as a service, is we have the ability to take a closed environment and open it up just a smidge for people to be able to understand their competitive advantage versus others. Now, we defined it earlier, but I think this is a good overview of just what benchmarking is. If you need to sell it to your leadership, it's probably a good sentence to use right here on the screen. But, kind of getting off it though, and just talking about the adoption. I mean, we're talking about benchmarking. Well, who's actually using it? Well, across all industries, as defined by Workday, benchmarking has over 400 customers contributing across 70 countries. I don't know if Antarctica is in there or not. I don't think it is, but it's a lot of the customers, all of the industries, and the vast majority of countries with respect to Workday adoption. So it's got a lot of really good data in it right now. And all of the information is available over a little over 70 delivered benchmarks. I think there might be like 72 or 73 or something like that right now, but there's 70 plus delivered benchmarks, and they primarily exist in HCM, financials, recruiting, and Workday usage. Now, there are some other major players kind of evolving, and we'll talk about this from a timeline perspective here, but Workday recently added compensation benchmarking for US customers. So there are improvements constantly coming as the need arises. Now, we talk about why it makes sense to do it in Workday. And there is a difference, and there is a reason why we would want to opt into this if we have the ability to. And the first of which is it's timely, because data can be informative. But if it's out of date, even by say a couple months, it puts you at a disadvantage. If a bunch of organizations start doing mass hiring in January and we're looking at December and November data, we're operating with old information. So the metrics that you receive as part of Workday and benchmarking are going to be delivered to you in a consistent and timely fashion. And it's going to eliminate that manual compilation that a lot of folks even do today. Some metrics are going to be available immediately after configuration. Some require about a month to do some calculation and sharing, but most metrics are going to be provided on a monthly basis. And if they're provided on a monthly basis, can view things like trends as well with benchmarks and understand what the trends of the industry are. So we'll show you how you can view some of this information in Workday, but just to show some of the benchmarks here, we put them on the screen and we're highlighting some of the ones for D&I, kind of why we're here today. And I'll just leave this on the screen a moment for folks to read through them. All right, and to kind of help sell some of the different benchmarks, there's some other ways to look at it. So here are some benchmarks by functional area, and sometimes they need mappings. When it comes to things like job profiles, well, we might have, or job grade or comp grades or things like that, we might have to map them against some standardized Workday ones because every organization is a little bit different. But other than that one kind of painless initial setup, you're commonly good to go once you turn benchmark on. And I'm just kind of talking to stall a little bit while you all read through the screen. Now, one of the cool things there is with this is that there's multiple dimensions to consider from the data. When we run some of the reports in the system, it's not going to be just show me the data and everything appears on the screen. you're going to have ways of slicing and dicing the data to make it more meaningful to you, whether it's based upon country, gender, tenure, industry, company size, etc. You have the ability to do so. And there's a couple reports that I want to just go ahead and pop out and show you in Workday. First up is going to be benchmark definitions, and that's going to be kind of like a dictionary, if you will, on what's available. We'll show you the benchmark values so you can see actuals for comparison, and then we'll also show you a trended version of benchmark values as well, just so you can kind of see the data over time. So that said, let me hop out of this and hop into a tenant. So the first report I just want to show you, and you might not have this turned on from a security perspective, is going to be benchmark definitions. Is this right? Oh, no, I want the report. I want the report. Okay, I'm not going to select any subcategory. I'm just going to kind of return everything. But when I run benchmark definition, I can see there's different categories. I have absence, absence policy, I think absenteeism. So I can see all of my different benchmarks that are possible. I can see what the field type is, numeric. You might see some other ones. Let's see, is this a field? Yeah. I can see numeric, currency. I can see some ratio-based ones. I can, if there is an expression or a calculation, it tells me what the calculation is. It tells me the components, it tells me the description, and it tells me the dimensions I can apply and whether or not I have opted into it. And if I've opted out for any specific countries, we'll talk about this in a minute, it'll list it here as well. So it's kind of a good overall, what the heck is going on with benchmark and what's possible report. Now, another report, so let's actually look and see what some of the benchmark data looks like. There's two reports. We're gonna first look at benchmark versus actuals, and then we'll look at it with an aspect of time. So I'm gonna go benchmark versus actuals. And you can see some of the dimensions in here. First of which is I have to specify the functional area, HCM, recruiting, usage, time and absence. I'm going to do HCM. I'm going to look at a benchmark of, let's see what my Asian population is, people who identify with an ethnicity of Asian. I'm going to do it for all industries or all my industry groups. I'm going to do it for any organization sizes, as well as any amount of tenure, any genders, but I'm only going to do it for employees in the United States. So I'm going to take some of the delivered values. And when I click OK, it's going to generate the data on the screen for me. So I can see my benchmark percentage of population that identifies as Asian is for this period, the numeric value, and the 10th percentile is 7%. The 50th percentile is 20%, 90th percentile is 107%. I might be, no, I'm messing this up, excuse me. It's 0.07%, 0.29, and 1.07%. So I can see what the trends are or what the different percentiles are in all the different industries. I can see how many people also participated. So this is from over 60 companies. And my value is 0.11. So almost 1% of my population identifies as Asian. And I can see that I am below the 25th percentile, above the 10th percentile, so between 10 and 25th. And this might be something I need to act on because I'm below the industry average. Well, there might be an aspect of location that you need to include in here, but it gives you a good idea from a non-report perspective of how certain things stack up for you. But that's kind of point in time for today. So let's look at this from a period range perspective. So I'm going to look back. I think this is 9, 10, 11, 12. I don't have enough fingers and toes, but I think this is like six-ish months. And I'm going to look at the same thing, but I'm going to look at workforce composition. I'm going to look at military status. And I'm going to see what percentage of my folks are US veterans. I'm going to do it across all industries, only for the United States. Kind of makes sense, it's a US metric. And I can see that, zoom in a little bit, I can see that from my benchmark, there's different periods, February, January, etc. I can see the different percentiles for the 60 plus people that participated, and I can see my actual values. I don't have one US veteran working for me, so that's a problem. But if I did have data, it would show me how that data changes and how that data is updated over time. I'm using test data, and it just so happens this value isn't loaded, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But it's nice because you can see this data over time. And I could also see the values as well. And then if I wanted to, I could also add some charting capabilities to this and see what it looks like over time. So 90th percentile, month to month, and how it's changed. So it's kind of cool because you can look at that stuff like this, but then you can also incorporate it into your reports as well. All right. So that said, we do have some copies of these reports in case you need to sell them to leadership or anything in the presentation, so you can kind of grab them there. But we just decided to show you in the tenant. But you can see that especially from a trending perspective, my screen was too zoomed in, but there's also dates that appear across the bottom, so you can see how the data is changing over time as well. Now, all of that said, there are some reports that already exist, but do not get pulled down because of some customers not opting in to the benchmarking. So there's two reports on community. There's benchmark versus actual diversity, benchmark versus actual ethnicity that exist. We'll link you to them before the end of this presentation, so you can pull them down from community if you're interested, but they go through it. And we have the diversity report here on the screen in case you're interested in seeing it. Now, something that I've mentioned a couple times though, is I've mentioned thresholding without actually saying it. So on the right-hand side here, you see the number of participants field. Another way that the data is protected in the data as a service features is going to be through thresholding, that number of participants, where depending on the number of people who are participating, you're going to have varying degrees of granularity in the metrics. If not enough people are participating for whatever reason, or not enough people are contributing to the data, then what you see is going to be influenced by that. And as minimums are met, it's going to continue to increase from there. And this is really to prevent any opportunity to derive customer information based upon the participant pool through the attributes. So breaking it down a little bit, if we have 6 or if we have less than 6 customers contributing, you're not going to see any of these quantiles or any of these percentiles. If we have 6 to 11 customers, then you are going to see the 25th, the 50th, and 75th percentile. If we have more than 11, then you're going to see all of the percentiles. So the number of people participating with specific benchmarks and specific industries is going to influence this. I would say with the number of people that are participating, it's usually a pretty safe bet that you're going to get at least 6 to 11. Though if you're like an educational sector or something like that, and there's fewer people participating, or if you're predominantly an international organization, there might be fewer. So plan accordingly, but you can always kind of turn it on, see what it looks like, and make the decision on what makes sense for your organization. So what goes into the implementation of it? So let's kind of go into the configuration just so you can see what it looks like, and it may be something that you want to uptake. Again, all the documentation is available in community, though it's helpful to kind of just have someone walk through it. And it's worth noting that updated benchmarking data is only available in your production tenant. You can access the benchmark functionality in a non-production tenant and sandbox and implementation preview, but it's going to be mock data. And it's not something that anyone would ever recommend for decision-making purposes because it's mock data outside of production. And I just want to stress to everyone again that if you want to see true benchmark data, it has to be in a production environment. Now, there is a task that you would need to do. You would need to sign the innovation services order form. It's not required for sandbox or implementation, but if you want to do it in production, you would need that. And then you would also need to opt into benchmarking. I can't show you how to do that form. That's something you want to talk to your Workday customer success manager about, but I can show you the opt-in and the remaining steps here. So to opt in, there are tasks. There's a task that you can run in the system called Innovation Services Opt-in, TNG. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of show you that in the system. And there's a lot of things in here that you can opt in for, and we'll just focus on analytics. But there's advanced benchmarks, public data, and Workday benchmarking. What you would want to do is opt into the Workday benchmarking one, and then I would absolutely recommend that people look into advanced benchmarks and public data as well. But Workday benchmarking is what you need to opt into to be able to get that aggregate data, and then be able to receive it on an updated basis. And then afterwards, we would also need to update the functional area. So I'm going to go into the maintain functional area page. And if you want to opt into it, you're welcome. If you want to opt in a test environment, you're welcome to follow along and go through the innovation services opt-in, check the benchmarking, and then go on to the next step. And the next step would be maintaining functional areas. And then it's one of these ones in here. There it is. There's a functional area for benchmarking, and then you could enable that functional area shortly afterwards. And after you enable it, you would need to update security before you can go on to the next step of running into configurable security. Now, let's say you go through, you opt in, you enable the functional area of benchmarking. What if you have some countries that you don't want to be eligible for benchmarking? Well, there is something that you can do to that. There's a task called benchmarking opt-in, where you can actually influence what countries are considered for, what countries might be excluded from data contribution. So for example, if for leadership and management effectiveness, for the benchmarks of management, span and control, I wanted to exclude a country such as Australia, I could do so. Every organization is going to have different requirements about what they can and can't share, especially when you get to a lot of the European countries. So this is something that you'll need to talk through and consider internally, but know that the functionality exists if you're interested. All right, and we have screenshots for a lot of this, so you can kind of see it in the future. I like to see it in the tenant, but I want to talk just for a moment about security, because we kind of put the cart before the horse doing a lot of that stuff there. We have a couple of the domains on the screen that you would need to update to make this happen. The benchmarking management domain is going to provide administrators with the ability to access a lot of those tasks that I just did. Or rather, like opting out, for example, of specific countries. There's a domain for benchmark values, which gives people the ability to see benchmark values from the ecosystem. And then there's another domain to see your actual values. So sometimes people want to provide visibility into industry anonymous data, but they don't want to show what their data actually is to their internal population. So you have the ability to separate those out if you need to. And then I do want to just spend a quick moment talking about kind of how benchmarking has evolved. You can see a steady progression from when Workday 29 came out to when it debuted today. And we're in Workday 2021 R1 right now, so we're a couple down the line here. But benchmarking originally came out in 2016, or at least it was announced at Rising in 2016, and then actually came out in Workday 29 with the majority of them around HCM. And there wasn't as many dimensions, but they've added on over time. You have HCM and financials in 30, recruiting in 31, some new ones in 32. And then in 2020 R1, that's when we had the US-based compensation coming out. So 2020 R1 was the last major enhancement to it. they're still coming out. It's still something that's being heavily invested into. So check it out. And if you have ideas or suggestions, it's a great thing just to work with Workday on and let them know your thoughts and concerns and what you'd like to see. Now, there is some useful resources because these aren't conversations that you just go to your security guys, your security, security team and say, hey, I'm turning on benchmarking, have fun. They typically need some kind of justification. There's a lot of conversations that need to happen. So there's a lot of stuff on community, not only from an admin perspective, but also for you to help sell it internally if it's something that you want to do. So I would just recommend, if you want some more information, I can answer some questions. I could probably butcher some answers as well, but there's a lot of great information on community that, that y'all can reference. So the next logical thing to do is talk about migration. But before I do so, does anyone have questions on benchmarking?
Harvey, we did have a question.
I don't see those. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, some of them are coming directly to me. So, but anyway, it's a very simple question, really. They just want to see the statement that we had. I forget which slide number it was. It's the statement basically justifying benchmarking to our management, right? Saying, hey, this is the one slide, this is the one statement that you definitely want to have ready.
I had it somewhere. Oh my gosh, where'd it go?
Yeah, I was looking through it. I'm like, it was towards the beginning of the benchmarking.
It's like one or two back from here.
Yeah, I just forget the number.
There it is.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really nice, concise way to say it. And then if I'm trying to sell this to someone, I'm probably telling them this statement, and I'll just let you screenshot it really quickly. I'm probably telling them this statement, which I think is like slide number, I don't know, when we send the deck out, it'll be one of the slides in benchmarking, but I'm showing them that statement. And then I'm also showing them this report right here of the benchmarks versus actual by period range, because this helps tell the story about how you stack up your actuals against the different percentiles over time. And then again, these are custom reports. You can tailor them to the message and the data that you want to show. So you have the ability to influence and update these as appropriate.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. I think I have like 2 more slides, y'all. So thank you for bearing with me here. And really the last couple things that we want to talk about is migration. Now, if you're if you followed along and you get all this stuff set up, so first off, congratulations, that's awesome. But second is you're going to need to move it somewhere. You're going to need to do some of these steps again. You don't need to do the customer central step again, but you're going to need to activate domains. You're going to need to do that kind of stuff. And that's what I want to just focus on for a second. When you're ready to move this into your next tenant, whether it's production or sandbox, it's going to be relatively the same. But you're going to want to leverage object transporter, commonly called OX, to make this process a little bit easier. But there's still some manual tasks. You'll need to do things like rebuild trended workers. You'll need to take care of benchmarking and opt in. You'll need to set up your dashboards. Setting up things like security is super, super critical before you try to migrate any reports. Because if security isn't right in your end tenant, you can't migrate things because you have security attached to it today. And if it doesn't exist in your end tenant, it's going to bomb. So you want to make sure that you take care of all these items to rebuild things on your own. Trended workers, again, we talked about it for way too long for what it was in terms of process. Benchmarking is optional. It's something you can turn on later, but it's a great feature. Security, dashboards, content, menus, announcements, those are the kinds of things that I would absolutely recommend that you do before you try to migrate any reports. Because if you do that and you migrate the reports should be shared. The reports should be available on the dashboard. It should make it very easy for you. One other thing that might also be worth doing is if you have the knowledge or the ability to create configuration packages inside of Workday, you can do it. And then you can migrate your custom reports, calc fields, things like dashboards all at once, assuming that security and the target system is ready to receive them. So those that aren't familiar with it, if you ever just wanted to migrate something using Ox, it's pretty simple. You select the object, you select the related action, go down to integrate instance, and then you click migrate. So this functionality has been in Workday for like 5 or 6 years. So odds are there's someone at your company that's done it more often than they'd like to admit. But know that if you have security in the system correct and dashboards and things like that, it's a straightforward process to migrate reports, and you can avoid a lot of the headaches that you did today. So that said, Mike, I want to hand it over to you for next steps. But before I do that, I want to say that we'll hang out on the phone for a little bit longer. We'll stop the recording. And then if anyone needs a little personalized assistance with their environment, I know there's a couple people that did, then we'll also go ahead and try to address that. So Mike, you want to talk about next steps?
Sure, absolutely. So I will share the recording with Harvey and team, along with just some of the survey results, and then of course attendance data and all that sort of thing. Compare and contrast. The recording should be available to you, and along with the slide deck too. I think it was a really good deck, really good information, well run. But right now, what I want to do before I actually stop the recording, if we have questions, relevant to this specific to the Vibe configuration workshop, I'll go ahead and keep those. We'll do the Q&A with the recording in progress. But if you have something that you want to ask sort of offline, I'll go ahead and stop the recording after those other questions have been answered. So let's open it up as we conclude. And our goal today is to make sure all those questions are answered before we complete the workshop. Okay, question came in. Can we share the recording with our peers? Yes, because I will set you'll have a password, and it'll be, basically open. I think it's like a box I checked to just make sure it can be sent and distributed. So I will certainly do that. But it's not coming from me. It's going to come from Collaborative, right? So I'm going to send the deck already, of course, is there. I'm going to send all this data to Harvey and Kyla, and then we're going to go from there. So you'll get it from them. Community, great place for Q&A there as well. For some of these questions, they're going to require brainstorm or more steps in the process to get that question answered. But you'll see on the community page, the older Workday led slide decks that we're kind of using as just kind of the standard to examine. So those will stay there. I'm not actually adding recordings or taking things out. I'm kind of leaving those in place, but you'll have access to the recording and everything else. And the last thing I was going to say before I forget is, yes, of course. I was debating whether or not to bring this up, but when you go on community for Vibe Central, you'll see a link to user groups, right? I actually told Harvey I wouldn't mention this because, I was worried about time, but since we're under time, I'll bring it up. We did our first, we kicked off our first, which will eventually be customer-led user group on March 11th. And we had really good, some of you may have been there, but what we're looking to do in the future is to have the user groups will be Workday facilitated, but customer led, right? And some people are reluctant to do that because they're at the beginning stages of their Vibe journey. However, don't let that be a factor. Wherever you are in your Vibe journey, we're looking for folks to bring up topics of discussion, whether it be administrative configuration, or whether it be just strategy and application of Vibe Central, in the workspace and that type of thing. Whatever you want it to be, we can definitely put a team together and have that customer led. So I wasn't planning on bringing it up, but I just think it's relevant and I think it's a great thing to get involved in, and you'll see that on the community site. That's basically all I have. Let's get those questions answered.
Hi, I have a question. We have a fiscal year that doesn't align with the calendar year. And I don't know if we necessarily want to change the time frame that our trended worker data is looking at. And I built a calc field to customize our reports with. But like with the attrition report and the turnover report, it's the starting headcount looks at is showing 0. I don't know if there's a workaround that you guys have for that or what you guys recommend.
So do you want to use the fiscal calendar on do you want to use fiscal calendar for trending, or do you want to use your calendar, your like a year month calendar? Which one do you want to use for reporting and trending?
I guess we'd want to use it for trended data.
Okay. So, and I'm gonna see if I can answer this. When you run maintain trended workers, if you want to use your fiscal calendar, there's 2 things you need to do. One of which is you need to come into maintain trended workers. You're going to want to change your trending period to the fiscal calendar and specify your fiscal schedule, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're going to want to click OK, and you're going to want to generate your trending data. But on top of that, you also need to set the report up. And I'm just going to grab any sample report here. You're going to need to set the report up to look at the fiscal schedule.
Okay, yeah, I think my calc field does look at the schedule. But I guess it's the trended worker from maintain trended workers that I need to update that. I just didn't know if we wanted to do that system-wide.
Yeah, and it's for some reason it's not on here, and I'll have to figure out why. But when there's trended reports, it's probably because this is a matrix, but when there's a trended report, there's also going to be a field here that says look at the fiscal calendar instead. So you have to update it on the maintain trended workers, and then sometimes you also have to update on the reports as well. Now, if you've already generated the data, you're just going to have to purge, add the trended schedule, and then recreate it one more time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, hopefully that answered it for you.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to go to sleep tonight wondering why that field isn't there and what, where I made a mistake. And I'll think about it like 3 a.m. Any other questions come up?
Nope. Doesn't look like, nothing direct to me and nothing shared. We'll give it like 30 seconds, and what I'll do is I'll stop the recording. We'll hang out for a minute or two and just see if there's anything else that, other questions that we might not want to have on the recording.
Yeah, Harvey, this is Prakash from CSA Insurance Group. So one of the basic limitations that we see on the trended workers dashboard data source is 36 months of data, right? And we go all the way back to 2012. A lot of our trending happens all for those last 8-10 years. And that's why we chose Prism to pull all data, and we essentially replicated the trended workers in Prism. So I am curious to hear, and I know you talked about it, and Mike also mentioned something about that also earlier. I'm curious to know what Workday's position is on, all these dashboards to be available through the Prism. I mean, we just now have preferred to develop our own dashboards, but if something that's already available, that we certainly would like to pick the brains from.
Yeah. If you want, you could send me your email address and I will introduce you to Jacob Abrams and he will tell you everything and anything you need to know about Prism Analytics, if that works.
Yeah, in addition to that, I think that we would be doing a disservice to kind of mention what we think is the roadmap, because it might not necessarily be accurate. And I think kind of looking at this from a Prism angle and how we can best accomplish it there is probably going to be your best short-term solution, while a longer-term solution can be worked out with the appropriate folks at Workday. But I don't think either Mike or I could really give you that roadmap right now. So I apologize for that.
Oh, absolutely fair. Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you want me to, explore that a little further and see what we can do.
have a question that's a little bit more theoretical in nature. And first of all, this workshop was so fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been really clear. And I even learned some new things about trended workers that I didn't know already, which we've been using for a year and a half. So awesome. But as we look at vibe and diversity, we are a global company, although we're probably about half of our population is in the US. And our leadership likes to look at diversity as, you know, the entire company, but we do have a very significant Asian population, and we also have a significant population in India where, you know, ethnicity isn't really a thing. So we're getting some pushback from our leadership about how to really get a, I'm using my air quotes, true picture of diversity, when really to say that, you know, our engineering population is 70% Asian isn't really reflective, because they live in countries where there isn't as much diverse population as the way we categorize it in the US. So I'm just curious if other customers are experiencing this, or if, you know, Workday or Collab, if you kind of have some guidance on how to help make sure that we are thinking about it the right way, especially if we're going to be leveraging the benchmark data. Because if we do that, we're going to come in and look like, oh, we're killing it. And, you know, we're kind of not, because we're kind of counting folks that shouldn't be counted.
Yeah, I can take that on. That's a great point. That's something we're struggling with as well. I wouldn't say struggle. We are trying to find how vibe methodology works in the global environment, right? So we're exploring that, and it has to be done country by country. And I think the solution is flexibility and agility within the system, with just in our thinking as well, right? Because every place is going to be a little different, and we're going to want to collect data, you know, say in India or some other place. It's just going to be a different challenge. For example, South Africa and the way they you know, list race and demographics, that type of thing, is very different from other places. So it almost has to be done on a case-by-case basis. But those are good points we can continue to discuss in community. And that'd be honestly a great user group topic as well. Could be like leveraging vibe tools, technology, strategy for in the global environment. I think that'd be an awesome user group discussion, to be honest with you.
Awesome. I just joined the user group, so I'll just throw it out there as my my first post then. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll hang out for a couple minutes.